Hello, welcome to the Crackpot Podcast.
A beautiful day to start up a revolution. Molotov cocktails, martini shotgun shells. Wild, 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 wild one. God forbid the cops get called. I say the more the merrier inside this free. Gotta see it fall. I got front row tickets to the greatest show of all.
Welcome to the Crackpot Podcast. We have another special guest for you today. We've been doing guests. This is Mr. Carbon Mike joining us.
Good evening.
It's nice to have an opaque element on this face podcast. Okay.
You didn't get a blackout, but you got an opaque element.
well, wait, it's got to be a black up, right?
Oh, yeah,
right.
exactly. It's a black up or a black over or something more uplifting and less harmful to the delicate feelings, the delicate sensibilities of black people such as myself. That's right.
Oh, black up. We didn't even have
black
one,
up.
though. Yeah,
I
escaped.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See? Once again, we got robbed. It's like, damn you, white people. It's like.
Oh, PG&E. They this podcast won't air for a long time, but this is right when we are out of the woods for power outages. Is that better? Mm-hmm. Power outage instead of a blackout.
It's more importantly, this podcast will not air until Carbon Mike is beyond the moral blast radius. Okay. Being able to adopt a new identity. Yes.
I like that. The moral blast radius. I got to use that one.
Okay, I have a question for you, Carbon Mike, because we started talking. I wanted to capture all this good talk, but we were warming up, and okay. I asked you, we're talking about, can you talk to real life people about some of the things that you really believe in? And I was shocked because you don't have cover because you're a black guy, so you should be able to say whatever you want, and that's not the case.
That's kind of that's I suspect that is not the case, and I'd rather, of course I don't have hard and fast evidence of how that would affect my ability to work, but I'd rather not try it out. I mean, I work in the software industry, and I'm a software developer, so. A lot of the companies, if I wanted to work in Wall Street, that would probably be okay. But a lot of the companies that I might, and some of the types of companies I have worked for in the past have been, kind of media companies or media-ish companies. And, it would be, it would be a problem if if it was known that I believed some of the radical stuff I believe, like that, dudes are not women, and women are not dudes. And
wait a minute. Did you see what happened last night on TV? We were taping with Adam, so I had no idea. Well, I don't have TV in the house anyway, but the CNN homo debate that happened yesterday.
They had like an LGBTQRSTUV summit. Is that was the?
Yes.
That was the thing.
Yes.
Yeah. I gave that a skip. I decided to miss that one.
Oh man, I saw there was clips all about it in my Twitter feed today, and it's shocking. It's really shocking.
So not to hijack the conversation, but this is one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, like just in general. I've been thinking a lot about this among other things, right? I should maybe just give my what I've got going on here a little bit of a plug, is that I've started something called the Foundationist Society of New York. The foundationism is kind of my attempt to kind of, come to grips with the fact that we don't really have, that in America, we don't have a real conservative party, right, in our politics, and we don't have a real liberal, we don't have a real left-wing pro-labor party either. So it was kind of my attempt to come to grips with being politically homeless. I come from a union household. My dad swung tools for a living as a carpenter his entire career. My mom was an RN. It's like I'm the son of immigrants, okay? And what I found was that, man, these guys have lost me completely. Like, I just have no, right? So anyway, foundationism, I won't give the website unless you say it's okay. But anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's futurerad.io. Like, so future radio, but rad.io.
And I will link it. I will put it in our little notes. So
thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Way behind on updating, content and stuff, but it's there, and I'm trying to catch up with among other things, the backlog of great conversations with Jimmy over here. But anyway, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, okay, well, because part of the problem, I think, with American conservatism is that Republicans have been kind of running American conservatism, and the problem with Republicans is that they're out of ideas, out of imagination. They don't know how to talk to people. So, what is the thing with, why is this? So I thought, it's like, why am I so done with this idea of like the LGBTQ summit? It's not because I hate black people. My maternal grandmother, okay, who I spent a lot of my formative years with, okay, near the end of her life, she had 10 children. One of them died in infancy. So 9 adult children she had. And near the end of her life, she had only one of her children kind of who was in the country, because my mom was here and not there. Only one of her children actually stuck around and actually took care of her and took care of the house and everything. Okay. And that was my gay uncle, right? And, when he was younger, he was a dancer. He traveled around the world, what have you. And, he fell on hard times, whatever. But long story short, it's like, the reason I think a lot of us are upset with this stuff is not because we're secretly homophobic, was going to go and run a program on sexual dissidence. It's because this reads to me, and I think it reads to a lot of us, like a war on families. It reads like a thing that says, like, well, families are not essential. It reads like we're glorifying something that is not the mainstream. And the fact is that, no one should be bothered, or no one should be harassed or intimidated because they're not in the mainstream. But the mainstream is what keeps things going. Okay. And like, no one needs to be, I'm not interested in going after people because they're not, they want to color outside the lines. That's perfectly fine. But it's like, don't get it twisted. The world, our civilization works because of a lot of ordinary, normal, square people who get up in the morning and go and do a regular job and want to get married and have kids and want their kids to grow up and get married and have kids of their own. And that's why this system works. And so there's room in that for gay people. There's room in that for trans people, whatever you want to say. But the fact is, I don't like this thing of elevating the thing as if that's the thing. No, it's not the thing. There's room in schools too. And the problem with that is, like, the family, and I've been thinking a lot about this. It's the family that's the kind of prototype of society. It's the family is the foundation, foundationism, right? The family is the foundation of society. If the family goes, society goes. And, you can't have something that's anti-family. I'm sorry. I'm going on for a bit, so let me pause.
No, you're doing fine.
All right.
Yeah, you're doing fine. And I could add, I mean, what I hear from you and what I hear from so many people who are sort of like-minded with us, for example, James's old friend, David, who was on the show with me a few weeks ago, is that, like, we have this point of view where we wish to tolerate, we wish to give tolerance, we wish to have room for you, but we want to acknowledge that this is not the default point of view.
Not the default. Thank you.
Right. But what's going on with the other side is that the slippery slope is absolutely real. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you had like 10 or 20 years ago is, hey, we just want to get married. We just want to be treated like we want to file taxes together and have health insurance. Well, yesterday, on national TV with Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Beto, Francis Robert O'Rourke, Pete Buttchugger, and I don't know who else. These guys were out there with two 9-year-old children, cross-dressed and on stage and reading out scripts.
Wait. What? What are you talking about cross-dressed on stage?
Children.
What?
They had children doing this. They had 2 different 9-year-old trans children, okay, reading out questions, and moms standing there proudly with their little freak child. So what we have is an imbalance in attitude where we say, well, okay, let's just live together and somehow, work it out. And the other side is like, no. We have the Peter guy, Mayor Pete. He's saying that we need a federal department of mentorship for young people who want to do that. So we have.
Excuse me?
Yeah. Okay. That's in his campaign platform. So it's this really dangerous inequality in attitude that I think.
See. Yeah, like this. Now, this is a thing. I'm sorry. I'm going to go into another rant, but feel free to cut me off anytime. I don't want to hijack. But so I noticed this. Well, we've all seen that they're doing this in schools, right? And I've seen in my daughter's school there's a I saw a poster, like an LGBTQ poster and what have you. And the thing that occurs to me, and again, I had to think this through because I don't want to do the thing where kind of Republicans are bad at talking to people about where Republicans fail to frame the issue correctly. But it strikes me that, again, family is the foundation of everything, and public school teachers the reason some diminutive woman can control a student of any size is because of the legitimacy given to her by families. A student that can be controlled by a teacher, can be controlled by that teacher because they came from a family, a strong family with a mom, with a dad like me who's sitting there saying, hey, have a great day at school and God help you if I hear any trouble, from this teacher. And so I just feel like these teachers and the school administrators have forgotten where the legitimacy comes from. Now, none of these teachers want to teach in a school in a neighborhood where the family is non-existent, where the family is marginal, where you go to schools where where there's no fathers around, where there's no authority in the home, where the family is broken, and that's a school in which you, the teacher, can get knifed for telling a kid to stop what he's doing and go do something else. So all these kind of school administrators, all these well-meaning liberals, right, know very well, they know instinctively that the family is the foundation of everything. But they're doing all these things that are really anti-family. All of them may not be specifically conspiring against the family, but the net effect is just that. And so that's something I have I got a serious problem with. And I've been thinking a lot about Jimmy's been a big help in kind of like helping develop my ideas about how this goes back to the war against masculinity, the war against men, and the kind of fault lines that develop in a society when it loses its direction, when it gets too prosperous and loses its direction, and some of that is what's going on here, I think.
I've been enjoying this ebony and ivory hate parade here. Okay,
ivory is kind of overstating it, James. I'm a woman of color.
You're a woman of color, huh?
Uh-huh.
Well, that's right. Italian. I'm sorry.
Italian. Thank you.
Yes, Italian. I just can't develop any intolerance for all these faggots and freaks because, I've gotten to the point where I probably can only beat the shit out of half the men on the planet right now. And the idea that I could possibly be like one of the only straight guys left in a couple of years, that appeals to me.
Oh, yeah, right.
I've got no problem with his current campaign of emasculation. All right, so it's my only chance of getting any action.
You know, it's all fun and games, James, but we have children. You have grandchildren. And actually, you know, they're going after the men and the women, the young children, they're going after both. And it's actually, young girls are really susceptible to it. And both of the kids that they showed last night were girls. So, I mean, I get what you're saying. You know, for James, that's kind of like the way we do it, right? It's all fun and games. But
I was entirely serious.
I know you are. Serious about your fun and games.
James is ruthless, man.
Yeah.
Jesus. He's a beast.
There was a school. I saw a school mural from Harford County, Maryland, when I was reading the Harford County Aegis, which I think was the shield of Zeus that they've named this newspaper after, which used to be conservative in a rural agricultural area of eastern Maryland. And this female art teacher had her students do this mural that covered one of 4 sides of an indoor auditorium. And it was all about student aspirations. There were 3 heroic illustrations of women, young women of different races having achieved what they wanted in this illustration. This was a year and a half ago I wrote this article. What I specifically remember are the 3 male figures in this. One was a European-looking guy that was wearing a Middle Eastern cap that fit right over what would be the bald spot on the top of his head. Okay. In religious contemplation, he looked very monastic. There was no hint that this guy was ever going to reproduce.
Right.
Then there was the Latino male is represented by a boy, not a man.
A boy.
This mural that is not an adult is a Latino boy who's cheering himself on for scoring a soccer goal. So this is telling the Latino boys of the future that you're the pet of the elite. And the male African-American figure was depicted as physically muscular and dark, which is unusual to see depictions of dark-skinned African-American men in these liberal murals, but he was flamboyantly homosexual in illustration. So you have basically have 3 non-breeding males there. You've got a boy, and then you've got 2 men, one that's academically emasculated and the other one that's just like this flamboyant gay guy. And that's a totally toxic message. But the 3 illustrations of women were all heroic, including an illustration of a woman. The most ascendant figure in this was a woman in Islamic headscarf. And this mural that charts the future for these children. And that was just amazing seeing that. And this is a high school that my grandchildren are going to.
Yeah. Part of the Homo Summit yesterday was when a black man who was dressed as a woman stormed out of the audience and up onto the town hall, like the secondary stage, and started shouting, grabbed the mic from whoever was talking and started shouting about black trans women are being murdered every day. And then Don Lemon was there, who I'm sure you know who that is, right?
Yeah.
So he was there, and he kind of started negotiating, like, please come over and hand me the mic. And he actually they exchanged the mic back and forth. He let her talk, and it was just bizarre. But it was insane to think that this is what our like standard cable news is doing now.
A public transfer of pseudo-vaginal authority
between 2
that's pretty cool.
Sexually deviant black men.
Well, I mean, like now here's the thing. You know, I blame. I mean, of course, the left is very much to blame for this because the left has lost the plot, really, right? I mean, I look at I've been following UK politics a lot because they've got the Brexit thing going on. And that's just very interesting to me, because that's kind of this class divide that I told you I wanted to talk about being thrown into kind of stark relief. But I have to say that I also think that the political right, especially in the U.S., bears some responsibility for this, because there's an awful lot of people. I mean, like, if you think about like guys my father's age, and even I think something I read from Jimmy actually touched on this, right? The invisibility of a certain kind of black man to the political elites, right? On both sides, right? I think about guys, my dad's retired, right? But you think about guys like him, or even, younger than him, who swung tools for a living, who maybe were born here, maybe came to this country, but actually, got up in the morning and did the right thing and went and did the job and what have you, and took care of their families. Okay. So the political left has nothing to say to people like that, because the left is not interested in you if you're actually getting up every day and doing what you have to do. Okay, like you in other words, they're only interested in you if you were weak or a victim or what have you. Okay, but on the flip side, the political right also has nothing to say to him, because they want to talk to us as if we're not capable of kind of political calculus, and the only reason that a black person could vote Democratic is because they want free stuff. It's like, well, so in other words, like, if white people, if so-called deplorables in the flyover states are correctly, in my opinion, angry at being called, being referred to by Hillary Clinton as a basket of deplorables, right? They're correctly pissed off about that. Okay. Well, then it's like, don't call me gullible. It's like, right? I mean, like, approach me and make the case. Like, show me enough respect to ask for my vote, rather than very publicly and loudly saying, well, it's no use asking for this guy's vote because he's black and lives in a city, so he must just want free shit. It's like, I've had a checkered work history, coming up and doing this and that, and then getting into software development. But the fact is, I've never drawn unemployment, even in the times I've been unemployed. I've never even drawn an unemployment check, even though I've paid into it. Okay. And so if you want to tell me, and it's like, the Republican narrative should have resonance for me. It's like, I taught myself to write software. Okay. When I was living in Baltimore, eating a bowl of rice a day. Okay. And I clawed my way up into the technology industry, moved back to New York City. Okay. And it's like, I'm very big into personal responsibility and into, like stop complaining and do the work and get up and execute. Okay. And the fact is that, like, the Republicans have nothing for me. Because when they speak to me, they can't speak to me respectfully. They can't say, here's my case. Here's why I think you should. What they say to me is, well, you're gullible and you're on a plantation, so vote for me. Even the so-called, like, black conservatives, like, Candace Owens, let's assume she's a lovely person, but it's like, all she can seem to do is kind of like flip dumb racial insults on their head and fling them back at people. It's like, can you make a case for why I should vote for one agenda or another that doesn't involve you saying the word plantation? Can you talk about black landlords in Bed-Stuy who would benefit from smaller government when they try to renovate their houses and don't want the city crawling all up their ass? Can you make a case for business owners? Can you make a case for the fact that actual immigrants, legal immigrants to this country, are very conservative? Like the immigrant mindset is, put your head down, get to work, make yourself useful, and that's it.
I think I can explain it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it's because the Republican Party is not really anything. It's just...
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just an opposition party that accidentally, by some weird confluence of events, got the presidency, but that was never meant to happen. And it's just really like the secondary party in what we can now clearly see is a sham democracy that has just a huge juggernaut of state apparatus, and it only moves in one direction. So the government. So for example, right now, like, do you know who Talking Point? I think it's called Talking Points USA.
Talking Points Memo or Talking Points or Turning Point USA?
Turning Point USA.
TP USA?
Yeah.
Turning Point USA, yeah.
Those guys are doing...
Charlie Kirk.
Kirk, yeah. Like, these guys push a lot of the, lowest ever unemployment for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Blacks, women, Latinos, and all this stuff. It's like, okay, but it's not compelling, right?
No, it's not.
It's not compelling because, it's very good that black unemployment is low. I don't think it's good that women unemployment is low. I think women should not work. But this isn't, the point for the GOP is not really to win. It's not to win. And it never has been, or at least not in my lifetime. If there was some kind of viable political strategy to chip away at the black vote and say, you don't have to vote Democrat, but maybe you should vote something else, it's not going to be Republican. And it's not going to be anything else either, because there isn't anything else.
Yeah, so that's right. I think that's right. I mean, but here's the flip side is that I think, again, one of the reasons I started the Foundationist Society is because, it seemed to me that what was important to do was to kind of, develop, find like-minded people, develop a body of ideas, teach people, try to reboot masculinity, right? And try to build something that can at least keep the lights on as far as the things that are valuable in our culture and our civilization, whatever happens on the larger political stage. And I'm saying that because I know Jimmy is much more of a kind of let it burn and let the weak fend for themselves. And he has a point, but I also feel like, look, the other side doesn't give up when things, socialists and communists have seen their system fail spectacularly on an epic scale again and again and again. Okay. Most recently, probably in Venezuela. I think we'd all agree that was the most recent example. Okay. And when that happens, they don't say, okay, well, yeah, it's done. They say, well, let's try some other way. So I feel like those of us who really believe in civilization, some Western civilization, and who really believe in a certain kind of concept of how human communities can work. I think we just owe it to ourselves not to give up either, because they're not giving up. They didn't give up when the Soviet Union collapsed. They went and said, okay, let's do Gramsci's long march through the institutions. Let's take over the public schools. Let's take over the broadcast facilities, and let's do it that way. So, that's my take on it anyway. What's your read on that, Jimmy?
Well, I think civilization, to be sustainable and to be my liking, should be very small. Should maybe consist of a couple of cities with some libraries and research facilities in it, and everything else should be barbarism. And I think maybe that's really the purpose of the left, is to burn it and to get things, for instance, educational institutions, other than a couple, I think should just all burn. I would, if I was king of it all, I would literally burn down every university and every school, and I retain some of the male professors as librarians, throw all the female professors into my secretarial pool under Lynn's supervision. And hey, dude, somebody's got to sharpen the old battle axes and polish them up, so they feel better about themselves. So, I'd throw myself on that particular sword. But I think civilization's got to go. I think that's really where, as soon as you start a civilization, the rot sets in, and eventually you end up with a really emasculated and perverted matrix, because they all end up looking like this in some way or another at the end.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to maybe see Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, and maybe San Francisco is like the only surviving nodes of civilization and everything else being a howling wilderness with barbarian tribes. And
I think Texas could hold its own in that mix as well. The entire state, well, maybe minus Austin.
Yeah, and then so that way, if you get some big brain nimbus that growing up in Tennessee, then it wants to read a book, then maybe he can make it all the way to Salt Lake City, and do what he wants to do. But otherwise, he just dies in the wasteland and as part of this process of making sure that men improve instead of degenerate. Yeah, I just think it's ridiculous to think the whole equality thing. It's probably the most perverse take on civilization.
Well, I think you're onto something, at least as far as the kind of the perversion of the equality. Because here's the thing, right? Like, I was thinking about this just earlier today, right? Is that, one of the things that gets on my nerves about these lefties is that they seem not to. Okay, so like among other things at the ranch here, like I bake my own bread, right? And so what's the thing about leavened bread? The thing is that you need flour to give it structure, and then you add yeast to lighten it. Okay. But if you were to take yeast, if you just take a whole bowl of yeast and kind of add water and then add a little bit of flour to it, what you'd have is a sour mess, right? So, and civilization is similar in that, like, strength and order. That's the thing that gives civilization structure. You have to have enough strength to hold your enemies at bay, enough strength to hold the mob at bay, right? Enough kind of structure to know where democracy applies and what things should be put beyond the reach of democracy. And then like mercy and kindness are things that you add enough of that to make the whole thing livable. Right. But what these cats want to do is like they want to have like a whole bowl of like kindness and acceptance and like softness and what have you. And that's not going to work because you can't add strength to that. Hopes to withstand your enemies. Put it that way.
Well, I think it's the ripening of the crop that's going to be reaped. That's the way I look at it. So you think of this. Imagine if, like, tomorrow there's an EMP blast and stuff goes to hell, right? The whole reason why this thing's going to be cool, if that happens, is because all those lefty faggots and feminists are going to be out there. And it's going to be like when the people of Uruk were wailing over Gilgamesh's oppression so much, the gods couldn't stand it anymore, so they had to make a rival for him. The thing that would be really cool about a last day of civilization scenario would be all of these sissies and, Lynn, bitches actually wailing to heaven as they get slaughtered. They're going to add flavor to it, but they're the meat. That's the herd that's going to go up the meat chute right there. Yeah. And the people that survive, the nutty preppers and stuff like that, well, then they'll be around for the next generation. So I think that this kind of thing comes to a head eventually, like with Rome. There was no Italian troops anywhere on the peninsula to defend against the German tribes. In fact, the only military the Romans had were Germans themselves.
Mercenaries. And that's never a good idea. Yeah.
So this softening thing, I think it does. It's headed for a crescendo. The people in charge think that they're just making this bigger, better, more complacent herd. But I think in the end, it's just going to be more fuel for the fire whenever something goes right, which would be like a meteor or something like that.
That's funny. There's a science fiction trilogy called the Great Winter Trilogy. It's by this Australian cat named Sean McMullen. And it's about this future, this kind of dystopian future. But it's not human civilization has been destroyed, but not by a nuclear weapon and not by any kind of environmental anything. But long story short, it has collapsed, right? And so in this world, in the civilization that's kind of come up from the ruins, the library is kind of the most important thing. And libraries in this civilization, librarians are kind of the highest ranking people, and they walk around armed, and they fight duels with flintlock pistols, right? So I like the idea of I don't like the idea of decline that much. I've got kids, what have you, but I do like the idea of certain things, certain kind of cultural artifacts being the things that you defend as darkness falls, right? The idea that like the library is important, maybe it's like the library, the workshop, and the tower. That's if you want to talk about archetypes, right? It's like you need the smithy, right? To build the things, the essentials of life and tools and weapons and stuff. You need the library, and you need the tower. I'm not sure what the tower is, but
plow, book, and sword is one way.
Say it again.
Plow, book, and sword. Basically the way.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
Society was oriented.
Yeah.
And I think eventually we're going to end up with a version of that, but this is just a fat, degenerate time, and actually a lot of what's going on with all this promotion of the gay stuff is already affecting what's going to be a reduction in the population.
Well, yeah. Well, and listen, some of these cats are really into that. I mean, this is, I remember, when I first started to really look at this environmentalist thing and say, hey, what the hell's wrong with these people? It's like realizing that, they're kind of deeply, they build themselves as being, egalitarian or whatever, but they're deeply anti-human. And yeah, they don't want people to have kids. They don't want ordinary people to have kids, But I'm of the opinion that you can argue. I mean, decline can go one of two ways, right? Because like the Roman Empire it wasn't like a catastrophic collapse. It was like over time, you had various tribes coming through and kind of the whole thing fell apart, right?
Yeah, it was a 300-year process.
There you go, right? So decline doesn't have to be catastrophic, and more to the point, there were institutions that kind of maintained, that kept the lights on in a sense, right, and that preserved the best of whatever had come before through the subsequent period. And then that gave rise to there was like the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, what have you. So in the same, part of my thing being a science fiction geek, I called my thing the foundation of society in part because my dad used to actually pour concrete foundations for a living, and in part because I had read Isaac Asimov's Lynn, Isaac Asimov's Foundation, and that was a thing where this guy knew that the thing was collapsing and said, okay, I can't avoid the collapse, but we can build institutions and structures to help those of us who are interested weather the worst of it and keep the lights on until the next thing. Because, you could argue that this thing that always happens. Like if you listen to Jordan Peterson, he talks about this, right? How civilization gets to, it's like the Tower of Babel problem. Civilization gets to a certain point, it gets advanced to a certain point, and then there's a systemic collapse. And then you go and you pick up the pieces and you build again. And it's a cyclical thing, and which is fine, right? It's just like maybe the lows don't have to be so low, maybe if enough of us pay enough attention to what's important, we can make it so that we can minimize undeserved human suffering to the extent that's possible. I got no problem with some. I mean, these people who are like abusing kids, like giving life altering chemicals to minors because they've got some kind of gender problem. Those people need to suffer because that's child abuse. So I got no time for them. But as usually the case, when things collapse, ordinary well-intentioned people who are doing the right thing, they often get it the worst. That's the ironic thing. It's like we'd like it to be the case that only Pete what's his name and his camp followers get it in the head, but that's not how it usually works.
No, I fear and feel that there is massive human suffering on the horizon because we have huge populations around the world that seem like are dependent on a lot of technology that maybe doesn't seem like it's going to really be able to continue, depending on how populations change and advance or don't advance. But you said a few things that struck me. Well, first, your principle of a sort of a conservative worldview coupled with a value for labor.
Yeah.
That was like, that's kind of is a little bit Trumpist, or early Trump, or 2015 Trump, and that's a big part of the reason that people want less immigration, because it puts pressure on wages and on all the services that people receive. Yeah. But it politically just doesn't exist. There's no room for it. So and I think just look at California. Okay, here's where I live. It's absolutely a Democratic hegemony. There's no, Arnold was a Republican by party, but there was nothing much Republican about the way he ran the place. And actually, he tried to put in some very mildly conservative measures and was instantly shown that he had no power. It's basically like a small scale version of what the federal government has done to Trump since day one. Like, oh, you want to do something? No, courts say no. You want to do another thing? Oh no, you have to. It's like the paperwork is wrong. Well, you can't just do. I'm here telling you what to do. Just do it. No way. So that's what you have. And on the other hand, when Gavin Newsom took office, he said. Instantly, he gave this executive order that there would be no more executions. And the next day, on the TV, on the news, was all these guys taping up the lethal injection room, in the prison, even though it had never even been used in years. But we're doing this show of right. So that's what it looks like when the state is all aligned and moving together. Whereas then Trump would give an executive order that people just laugh at. So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. No. So here's a couple interesting things about that, right? So first, I think that's giving Trump a little bit too much credit, right? Because Trump. So here's what. Just a brief thing about me and Trump, right? So I'm, unlike a lot of conservatives, I'm not a big Trump fan. I have a lot of friends who are big Trump supporters, and the conclusion I came to about Trump is that it's not that people elected him to try to push a particular set of values necessarily. Like, a lot is made in the media about, for example, evangelical Christians who are all in on Trump, and they say, well, how could you be a Christian and yet you support this guy? And the metaphor I came up with after really chewing on the problem, in other words, like really thinking about it as if the people who don't agree with me are real people and have minds of their own, is that my Christian friends who are in on Trump, it's the metaphor of dates and bodyguards, okay? Dates versus bodyguards, which is, if you, if a woman, I mean, you're married, okay, but if a young woman is going on a date with somebody, okay, she wants to have something in common with that guy, right? They should have seen some of the same movies. They should have some things in common. They should kind of line up on certain things, and then they can have a good time. Okay. But if a young woman needs to go into a really bad part of town for some reason at night, right? And she decides to hire a bodyguard. Well, she doesn't care what a bodyguard thinks and what movies he's seen. That's not the point, right? Like, the point is that you're hiring this guy to keep the crazies off you, okay? And the way I see it is that Trump was, this was a thing where people in the country, especially in the parts of the country that used to be behind the blue wall or in front of the blue wall or whatever, decided that it was time to hire this guy to keep the crazies off them because the crazies had gotten too crazy, right? And something, they're not. Even though I personally don't care for Trump, I think he's a lowlife. I understand that. It's like, yeah, we don't, because Trump doesn't necessarily, he's not a conservative. He doesn't believe in anything necessarily. He's just bombastic, and he kind of doesn't give a shit, and he'll keep the crazies off you.
That's my family.
Say it again.
People in my family voted for him on the terms that you just described, and that's it. That's what the ones that told me that they voted for him. Yeah. That's what it was. They thought things were getting too weird, and he would be strong enough to
just push him back.
Goodness at bay.
So look what they're doing now with the Homo Summit. Okay, it's getting more weird, and the crazies are still there. But I'll say this, because I agree that Trump is quite wishy-washy in many things, and he's not conservative the way that most conservative think of themselves. Like
he's effectively conservative, not a principled conservative. Yes, right.
But his trade policies, there's video of him, I think, like on Oprah from 30 years ago, saying that we need to improve our trade policies, and he's done that to a great extent, and I think that has made a big difference for American workers. And any cut down that he can do on immigration has helped American workers. So I do, it's not fashionable to defend him, at least not in like the radical right circles that I run in. But they all hate him, But he's, just think if Hillary was president. Just think if like Mayor Pete is going to be president, or Elizabeth Warren. Jeez. Just think and I pray to God that Hillary will run again, and I think there's a good chance. But because I want her to lose again.
Well, I mean, this is what's funny, right? It's like I can't stand Donald Trump, but it's like I don't want the Democrats to win this time. I really don't. It's like, and again, I remember, as someone who really appreciates, the rule of law, really appreciates, the good things about our system. I mean, I remember when the Central Park Five were found out to have been not guilty, right? Like someone else did that shit. This was, I don't know if you remember this case, but five black guys got snatched up for it, right? And it turns out that someone else did that shit, right? And Donald Trump refused to back down from having said that, these guys should get the death penalty. It's like that's one thing. It's one thing to say that actual rapists should get whatever done to them. It's another thing to say that like, well, these guys are innocent, but you don't care. As a child of a working guy, as a child of someone who swung tools for a living, a lot of working class guys got screwed by Trump. So that's where I am. But I'm with you in that I don't want the Democrats to win because they don't deserve to win because they hate the very people that they say they're in favor of. They hate they say they're, Bernie Sanders says he's for the working man. Elizabeth Warren says she's for the working man. But these people, by their actions, they've shown they hate all the things that actual working class people really love and value. They hate family, the idea of like the two-parent family. They hate the traditions and what Chesterton called the arts and honors of the poor. So I see where you're going there. You mentioned California. I just wanted to jump in on that because the California thing is very interesting because you mentioned Schwarzenegger, right? Now, this problem goes way back, right? Because actually, this goes to the thing of kind of state capture by forces that have been able to game the system and be effectively larger than the state. And this is something that we didn't always allow to happen. We used to live in a country where like a Republican president could go after companies that were too big and say, hey, Standard Oil, you need to chill the hell out, But because remember the company called Enron, the energy trading company, right? One of the things that Enron did was they gamed the entire state of California with essentially a manufactured energy crisis. And they did that to the tune of on the order of $1 billion, right? Okay. Now, there was a governor named Gray Davis. I don't know what kind of governor he was, like how well he governed California, but that's irrelevant. What is true is that at some point, Gray Davis was trying to take Enron to court to see if California could recover some of its money. OK, and then there was a recall, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger, who I understand, I don't have hard facts on this, but someone keep me honest, was actually friends with Ken Lay of Enron. I was like, Arnold Schwarzenegger becomes the governor. So all that by way of saying that I think like this is in other words, this is not just a failure. It's almost like it's not just a failure of government, it's a failure of citizens.
Yeah.
To kind of get a clear sense of what's going on, what's happening to them. It's a failure of elites in that, like, we're always going to have elites, but the question is, where do our elites as a society, where do they see their interests?
Our elites have no loyalty whatsoever to the subject. There's
right,
no
exactly.
noblesse oblige, or however you say that French word.
Exactly.
The only thing George W. Bush did right, this is actually quite impressive if you think about it, is he put his pal Ken Lay in prison. Okay.
Yeah.
Obama didn't put any financial executives in prison. Corzine should have been in prison, and many others. And
yes, but that's I don't want to cut you off. I keep going, but I just want to say yes, I agree with you, except for the fact that the real scandal there is that there was nothing to put them in prison for. Meaning the real scandal, right, is that what they did was not illegal. That's the real problem.
Well,
and listen, that goes back to St. Clinton, who eliminated the firewall. You talk about the financial crisis, for example, right? Because you're talking about Obama putting people in prison. Well, one, there was nothing to prosecute these guys for. There had been a firewall with banks between high risk finance and things like mortgage lending. And it used to be the case that, listen, if you're a retail bank, you can't just go and invest in these high risk securities because your depositors are insured by the federal government. There's a federal backstop there. So you can't do certain kinds of investment if you're a certain kind of bank. So, that was called the Glass-Steagall law. And Bill Clinton signed the repeal of that. So anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's true. This was kind of like part of my line of work in the old days. So there are crimes like for example, MF Global, they misappropriated deposits. That's absolutely a crime.
Okay.
So, and like any crime, any prosecutor, any city or county or state, it's up to them what they want to prosecute, right? Believe me, if you had some accountants and lawyers in a room together, and you said, "Hey, John Corzine needs to go to prison," make it happen. They could absolutely do it. They could do it instantly.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And they did
it.
True. And
this
is why, like, it's nice to enjoy the rule of the law, and I do enjoy the rule of law, but it's just pretend. The Constitution is just pretend, because if people, like, you can say as a personal judgment, and I can say this righteously, John Corzine belongs in prison. I don't care why you put him there. You need to put him there. Because this is how the media is approaching against Trump right now. They have no clue. What happened to Mueller time? Mueller time was nothing.
Yeah,
and so now we're doing Ukraine time. Okay, well, you don't like Trump. You want him to go to prison. So you're just going to look until you find something. Well, Ken Lay and Jeff Schilling, they went to prison. Although I suspect it's possible that Ken Lay escaped because he quickly died of a heart attack once he went to prison. So I believe he could have escaped, faked his death, Epstein. But he did. He went there, and what they did. And the other thing about looking for technically illegal acts is it completely ignores the concept of honor and ethics.
Yes.
It's not illegal for me to screw over the entire state of California, so I'm just going to do it.
Right. Okay. So
now we're going to make it illegal. So after Enron and WorldCom and Tyco, we had the Sarbanes-Oxley laws passed. And are you know those guys? Yeah. So this law was like a huge financial set of financial laws, which is like looking backwards, like, oh, all these things that went wrong, now we're going to fix them with this law. Well, that's just inviting people to do something else wrong.
To do something else, to game the system in some other way. So I'm completely with you there. Yeah. I mean, let me just jump in and say, like, this is something that I'd also had on my mind, getting ready for our talk tonight, which is that, one, what you said about honor is exactly. I know Jimmy's got some input on this, but this is exactly right. Is that, like, you can't. In other words, the law can only do so much. And that, when I talk about the failure of elites, right, it's like you have to have elites that at least have a sense of honor. You have to have a society where the sense of honor is ingrained enough that people understand what you shouldn't do, even if the law allows you to do it. That's true, right? But I think the other thing, so yeah, if as a society you dispense with honor and you dispense with shame and honor, because they're kind of mirror images of the right, like the way a healthy society spreads its values propagates its values is through shame and honor, right? You know, you should be ashamed of yourself. Oh, look at you, you've done something great. And and no healthy society can dispense with those concepts. If you do, you get the problems you might expect. But the other thing is the question of scale. I think a lot of these problems that we're seeing, you know, people are always going to be greedy. People are always going to try to get over. There'll always be dishonest businessmen. But the problem is that we got, especially after World War II, we got into a thing where we let these institutions, private institutions, we let capital get so big, okay, that you had to have these kind of failures. Whenever you have, these institutions grow so large and they become so removed from the communities that they're supposed to be rooted in, you get this kind of thing. And this is like, I'm always talking about G.K. Chesterton. He was a proponent of this philosophy called distributism. And distributism basically says that capital, it was definitely not, it was pro-capitalist, but their idea was that capitalism works best when there's a lot of small capitalists. You let a few capitalists get too big and they can undermine the whole system. So I'll pause there. But when you said that made me think of that.
How many ways can I get in trouble here for saying you people?
It's for saying what?
You people.
How many ways can I get in trouble?
You people.
Go for it.
Robert E. Lee used to say it when he pointed at the Union Army. Those people.
Those people.
Okay, so you people seem to think that this nation was set up for the good of the working people.
I don't. Yeah.
Which is, it's
true. Yeah.
It's the common, it's what we're all taught and everything. But for Cracker Boy and The Greatest Lie Ever Sold, when I looked at the founding documents,
mm-hmm.
I went through them line by line with an understanding of what these words meant to people back then. Just what jumps out at me is that it was all about liberty. And the idea of liberty in the late 1700s was
mm-hmm.
the liberty to dispose of your human property as you saw fit.
Yes.
And the state, as it existed, was only there to help you secure your property. The only police that existed were goers. Just the guys that rounded up the runaways.
Yeah.
If Carvin Mike and I were running away and he was teaching me how to write so I could pretend to be his owner and forge freedom papers and
mm-hmm.
got caught by the police. Well, the police are only out there looking for runaway workers.
Yeah.
So I'm
with you, and I'm with you there, Jimmy. It's like, and I don't want to kind of like romanticize the kind of, all civilizations. All civilizations begin with an act of force and an act of theft, right? That's just how they all. But it's also true that, in the same way that peace is an accident, right? In other words, like the natural human condition isn't peace and relative prosperity and what have you, functioning markets. And so, yes, peace is an accident, and a more or less functioning democratic republic in which someone of some color can show up and put the work in and kind of achieve a middle class existence. Yeah, that wasn't the original design, but it's a happy accident. And I'm saying, having found ourselves in a situation where we're benefiting from this happy accident, maybe what we shouldn't do is like the so-called revolutionaries want to do. Maybe what we shouldn't do is burn everything down. That's so I'm with you on that. But I'm taking it as a more of a structural thing. Like, what is the house in which we find ourselves now?
What I'm saying is this house is finally righting itself according to its foundations, right?
That's interesting.
Because nobody has any rights according to the founding documents of this nation unless they own another man.
Unless they own another human being. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
If you have no money, no property, okay, no chattel, you have no rights.
Okay? I would say that goes.
It was a felony. It was a felony to be homeless. Okay. to not be owned. The only way you could not be owned and get away with it is if you own somebody. That's the way this country was founded, and we don't really understand what these founding documents say by using the current versions of the English language, because the language has been perverted from what it once was.
And through the lens of 20th century prosperity and relative freedom, and acknowledging that race relations were different in the 20th century and not ideal. Nevertheless, different groups are much worse off than they were then. We have more quote unquote equality, but less functioning society. But one thing I wanted to say was that you were talking about equality and mercy in your bread analogy, and I want something that James has talked about, and I don't know if you really talked about directly, but this idea that you can get away from violence, the idea that you can have a society that is free of hostility and violence, and what you're doing is just papering over it with things like social justice and equality, when in fact you have something much worse, rotten, underneath.
Oh yeah, well that's I think I was talking about strength and mercy, right? And force and forbearance, right? I think that's a suicidal. Well, to call it a philosophy is to give it too much credit. That is not what you said, but what they seem to be saying is that you can just paper over everything and just have a lot of social. I think that's a suicidal idea, because again, force is part of the human condition. And I think Jimmy would probably agree that, the whole concept of mercy and forbearance, right? It's like you can show mercy to your enemy on the battlefield, but that presupposes that you're in a position to hurt or kill your enemy on the battlefield.
It implies a hierarchy.
That's correct, and you can't get away from. And I think that's one thing that again I really I have a problem with is that we're dealing with these social justice movements run by people who have no sense of human history, who don't understand that certain things are baked into the cake as far as humanity is concerned, like suffering. Suffering isn't a result of capitalism. I'm sorry, suffering is a result of the fact that human beings are what they are, okay, and that we live in time. And therefore we're cognizant beings, we're sentient beings, we live in time, so we lose things, right? Because we live in time, but we get to think about it, and we have to die, but we get to think about it, and so yeah, I'm with you 100%. I don't think you can get away from those things, and I think that the what Martin Durkin calls the new class are people who think you can just manage your way out of the problem. That's why the Brexit thing is so interesting. Not to change topics too abruptly, but the idea that there's these people want to say, well, now we want to get rid of national sovereignty because we can appoint a big enough group of bureaucrats that they can regulate us out of human conflict. If we have enough of a bureaucracy in Europe, then there'll never be another European war. I was like, well, why? Because that's the way the new class thinks, because they don't know anything about history, they don't know anything about human nature, and they don't care to know. So yeah.
They also are in the business of human domestication, right?
Yes,
a farmer looks at his flock or his herd or whatever it is, a rancher, and says, I only need one bull per 50 animals or whatever it is. I don't know what the ratio, and that's what it is, that with enough pressure, they can squeeze out some of the hostility, but it's not squeezed out yet,
Well, I was thinking about this, that every age, every historical age is kind of a prisoner of its reigning metaphor, right? So it's like right now our reigning metaphor seems to be computation, right? Because computers are a big deal, and of course this is my industry, right? But I've noticed that in the last century, it was about this machinery, and there's these machines, and you could somehow look at life and the world as as machines, and even like the
efficiency was the big
efficiency, right? Time and motion studies, and what's his name, Taylor, and all these cats, and even like the psychology of that era, right? It's like Sigmund Freud and the whole thing about the subconscious being like a steam vessel, where if you put too much into it, it'll explode, and there's like you have to have a relief valve, and it's like that's a pure metaphor. That's just like there's no ideas don't have mass, your thoughts don't have mass. There's nothing. There's nothing that says like your emotions are like some fluid or some gas in a steam vessel that'll cause an explosion if the pressure gets too high. That's that's a steam age metaphor, and our right now we're kind of in hock to these metaphors of computation and control, and the idea that there's an algorithm and there's a system that if you reprogram the system just right, everything will be fine. And that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. It's a fanciful bit of nonsense when the people with those ideas are just doing their own thing. But when those ideas start to hijack the mechanisms of state, right, and the mechanism of state has the ability to reach out and use like computing resources and software, what have you, and surveillance to kind of reshape society, we got a real problem. So
we're both into science fiction. And what you're talking about there is in the golden age of science fiction, the 40s and the 50s, it was, except for a couple of weirdos like Philip K. Dick, and Heinlein did a little bit of it. Mm-hmm. Most of it, even into the 60s, was, gee whiz, how can we get to the other planets? How can we get to the other stars? It's outward. It was really using the old paradigm of we can do better. Yeah, we can do new things. Mm-hmm. But what the computer technology ended up being used for wasn't to further the old paradigm, the industrial ethic that we can just do things better and go into new fields. Mm-hmm. It was taking this computation power and just using it for gossip. You think about I have an obsolete flip phone. Yeah. Okay, this is what James T. Kirk was depicted as using on Star Trek, which was supposed to be 300 years from now, this great communications device, and we already surpassed that, a decade or more ago. Yeah. Yet we can't get back to the moon. So it's really interesting. I'd have to think a lot of these science fiction guys, except for the guys like Dick that mostly focused on how technology was going to change social interaction, they would be turning over in their graves if they had any idea that all of their human advancements predictions just all fell on a barren lee shore, and all of this technological power is being devoted to sterile gossip. And it's kind of like social policing. Yeah, that's right. It's just really bizarre.
Well, something about that I was thinking about a little while ago, which is that because now people are the government's starting to look at Facebook and saying, hey, what's going on, what have you. I think Twitter's about to go into court and do discovery as a result of a lawsuit. But so when I was learning tech, I was still living in Baltimore, right? That was the era of the BBS, the bulletin board system, right? And that was the thing, and that was a social network. But there were thousands of them, right? And basically, you could if you had a computer, and you had a phone line and a modem, right? And you downloaded some software, you could start a BBS, and you would have a kind of Facebook, okay, with people you invited or people who learned about you and who dialed up your number and logged on and signed in, right? And so what's interesting about that is that was a kind of social networking that was scaled correctly because gossip is as old as society. But gossip has only become the kind of thing that can actually swing societies and push elections because it's because the companies running these platforms that have built these platforms have been scaled all out of proportion to what it is they're doing. It's like I always come back to the thing of scale. It's like Facebook is great as a pattern, as a kind of thing, but there need to be there need to be 5,000 Facebooks. The problem with Facebook is not that it exists, the fact that there's only one of it and it's huge. Because first of all, the moment it's huge, it has to pay for its infrastructure. How does it do that? It does that by weaponizing human attention and weaponizing human gossip. And it's the same thing goes with Twitter. Twitter's just a messaging system. That's all. Well, like I used to run a BBS at a certain point, and it's like I had maybe a few dozen users. Well, if I'd been really successful, I might have had a few thousand, or a few hundred. How big is any one person's social network really? You don't know a million people. You can't. You don't even know 10,000 people. The problem is that these companies have kind of grown to the point where they're all out of scale to actual human relationships and actual real social networks. And so what that means is they have to game the system, again, by weaponizing human attention, by selling your information to the highest bidder, because the service is quote unquote free. And so to pay for the infrastructure, that's what they got to do. And then they got the venture capital community basically printing money for them. It wouldn't take much for that to just go away. All the tools and the software, the technology, most of that stuff is open source. There's nothing stopping me from writing a Twitter service, right? A short messaging service that's network, whatever. It's almost trivial. But again, we come back to, scale. Scale is the thing. And it goes back to the Tower of Babel problem. Any system, it gets too big for itself, and essentially it has to collapse. And the problem we have is like, how much shit is it going to collapse? Is it going to take down with it when it does collapse? So,
these companies are obviously in bed with the government as surveillance concerns, but I have a suspicion that the people running these things actually aspire to godhood.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
want to name planets after themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
They're going to try to upload themselves. This has been a dream for a long while.
Yeah. That's right. That's
it comes down to the scale. Like you said, they have their hand covering enough human minds collectively that they have control over more people than any emperor ever had. So they're going to be essentially megalomaniacal.
Well, I'd argue that it's worse than that, because if they had control over people, because the emperor can control people, and you can have, how long did China have a stable society under an emperor? Quite a while, right? So the problem is worse than that. The problem is that because of their so-called democratic model, right? You could say it is a democratic model, but that's the problem, is like the Romans correctly feared democracy. The founders of the U.S. correctly feared democracy. Taking on board what you said about the early founding document, it's nonetheless true that there are certain things that any republic has to put beyond the reach of democracy. Otherwise, they're done. So there's certain kind of things. Basically, you have to have a constitution of some kind. Forget about the U.S. for a second. But like, if it's one man, one vote, that's fine. But if you're going to have a real society, you have to have things that the republic doesn't get to vote on. Otherwise,
Athens was a disaster. The Romans knew that. They picked it,
right.
And so now founding fathers know it.
Exactly. So the problem, what you're touching on, is the idea that it's not even as good as controlling people. It's like, well, what they can control is the mob, like specifically organism. That is the organism that Twitter gets to control, and that's way worse. That's terrible. Because then you have the thing of, you have the worst of both worlds. You have this mob, which is this supposedly uncontrollable thing, but then you have this meta mob that can basically aim the mob at targets of opportunity and say, go get them. And that's terrible,
Well, so I just think it's an evolution of this machine. This nation, before it became a nation, was just an exploitation zone for the exploitation of human property.
Yes.
And that's codified. What the founding fathers did is they were the overseers, and they took it away from the owner, because the big house was on the other side of the Atlantic.
The ocean, right.
And they basically just hijacked the thing. And it had, for about 120 years, they had to focus on a certain group they had to focus on the majority male population and tell them it was just for them.
Yeah.
So that they would go out and they would develop this thing in their empire. They would wipe out the Indians and go overseas. They'd impose will around the world. And then as soon as that was done, that support was withdrawn. And then they had to come up with basically go back to the old model, which is get all these different groups together and play them off against each other. I mean, that's how the old plantation system worked.
Used to work, yeah.
But basically, it ran from the, what we think of as the American system ran from 1865 to 1965.
Yeah.
And then we went back to the old plantation system, which was all about playing off different subsets of American working people against each other.
Well, now here's the thing. I mean, so I'm more or less with you there. I mean, I would say, going further back, right? If you look at, if you look at England, see, maybe the reason I've been obsessed with England so much is because I'm so tired of SJWs making like oppression is some black versus white thing. At a certain point, I was like, okay, this can't possibly be right. And let me go, so, and then you look at England and you see like, oh, wait a minute, this, like England has this long history of kind of like, being raw material for slave traders. I mean, the founding of London, London started off as a trading post for, among other things, tin ore, right? Animal hides and human slaves. Right. And that was the Romans sailing up the Thames and doing business and, right. And then you had Northern European thugs sailing down in their long ships and laying waste and raping and pillaging, what have you. And then it turned into something else. And they had regional strongmen, bands of savages, what have you. And eventually you get the rise of these kings, these monarchies. But then even in more recent times, you had the press gang. Right. I know you know about that. It's like and again, this whole I guess what I'm saying is that the that whole pattern of playing different groups against each other. It goes way back before the founding of the U.S. and maybe you could argue that it goes way back before the quote unquote founding of England. But then like look at the Roman Republic. What was that like? Because as I understand it, they didn't necessarily play groups off against each other so much as it was like force and order. Like, listen, we are Rome. We're going to build some roads. We're going to build some infrastructure. Pay your taxes and don't fuck up. Because if you do, we'll turn you into gravy. Otherwise, go about your business. What's your take on that?
The Roman experience, and it goes through the monarchy, then the republic, and then the empire. The empire goes through a couple of distinct stages. But basically, the Roman system, as we understand it, was a really severe us against them system. The U.S., the founding fathers, definitely tried to model. And the feature of this system was you can join us if you want to help us against them.
Against them, okay. Right. But here's the thing.
Internal hierarchy.
But here's the thing. In the Roman model, I have to say, like I understand why the Romans were like us against them, because who was them? Well, it was like the Germans, who were savages living in the forests of Central Europe, and the French, who were also savages, and it's like, it kind of made perfect sense for them to say it's us. And the thing about, as I understand it, is that they just kept expanding the circle of what us was. So, they push out here, they push out past the Alps, they push out, west towards Spain, what have you. And so there was a much larger us. And for example, like you actually did have people, I think I can't remember which emperor, it was either Trajan or Hadrian, he was Spanish. He was one of the tribes that lived in, right, Hadrian, right?
One of the 5 good emperors. The guy named Nerva appointed Trajan as his most able successor. So you actually had 5 emperors that were selected by the previous emperor, and this happened all in a row. And Marcus Aurelius is the one that broke this tradition by letting his son take over.
Oh, shit.
And he's kind of blamed for the terminal decline. But so you actually had a head of state choosing the most able head of state to succeed him outside of his family for 5 administrations in a row. And the thing is with the Roman system, as far as the amount of land and the number of ethnicities they controlled, with a standing army of only 150,000 men over that spread of territory, was really incredibly successful.
Yeah.
It's probably the most successful model as far as how long it was able to sustain itself. Part of it had to do with European geography, but mostly it was the Roman engineering and the fact that their government was essentially a violent crime syndicate. You joined us, and you can help screw everybody else over by being one of us. And if you screw up, we're coming. We might not be there until next year, but we're coming.
We're coming, yeah.
Okay?
That's when Tony Soprano, they asked Tony Soprano, where's the Roman Empire now? He's like, you're looking at it, pal.
You're looking. Oh, wow.
Well, here's what I want to say about all this, which is very, I really enjoy the ancient stuff, but what I find comical, because we're talking about plantation America, then we had like this interlude of middle class progress, and now we're getting back to it. But how can we look at our founding myth and know that these guys idolized Rome, know that Athens comes from, or democracy comes from Athens, and then pretend like this is a civilization built for the common man, for the good of like you and me, and we're just gonna all work together and make it good. Like these are incredibly authoritarian slave societies, empires conquering, right?
But all, yeah, I see what you mean. But here's, and that's a very good question. My answer to it would be, you don't have to pretend at all. I'm not pretending. In other words, like, look, how can I put this? So when I was a kid, from the beginning of my life until I was, I think about in junior high school, we lived in an apartment. And then my parents finally were able to buy our first house. And it was what they call a handyman special, right? Which meant it was like this dilapidated, boarded up house, out in Queens there. And it was, and you had to be a handy, you had to be able to fix it up because it needed fixing up, right? And so that's how we could afford it. And I saw my dad kind of gut and renovate this house from the inside out, room by room. It was amazing, right? The first night we spent in the room, it was literally in a room that was like, studs, wooden studs, and like with a plastic tarp stapled over it. That was the room, okay, and a space heater. And so my dad's going through and doing these renovations, and as a little kid, I wanted to help, and mostly I wasn't helpful. But you give a kid a hammer, and he wants to smash everything, whatever. And what I noticed in retrospect, thinking back to it, was that like one thing was that he was doing the opposite of deceiving himself about the structure we found ourselves in, right? He couldn't. I mean, again, he's a builder, right? He's got to build square and true. He didn't have any illusions about the structure we found ourselves in. He was like, okay, what works about this and what doesn't? And we're going to take apart what doesn't work slowly and carefully and replace it with something better. Now, that is, I'm afraid that in terms of human beings living on Earth, that's as good as it gets. I don't know what to tell you. Like every single civilization, like people, again, one reason SJWs get on my nerves so much is that they're always acting as if like only white people have ever enslaved people. And what I'm always telling is like, my ancestors were slaves. Look, your ancestors were slaves, my dear Lynn. Okay. It's like most of the people ideas. And so what I'm getting at is like, that's as good as it gets. It's like we don't, and you're right in that we shouldn't pretend anything about the society we find ourselves in. I think gratitude is a good starting posture. Like, thank goodness that today in 2019, we have some kind of system, okay, in which a white guy in Iowa who doesn't give a shit about me, okay, wakes up at 5 a.m. every morning, right, and works his ass off for a year, and then I walk into a climate-controlled building in Brooklyn and give a guy some green strips of cloth, and I get a pound of flour.
Or bacon.
That, or bacon or whatever. That is a fucking miracle, okay? Excuse my language.
It is.
Okay? And so I think in other words, I don't have to appreciate that and to want to preserve something that works more or less that well. I don't have to tell myself that this system was built by people who da 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 da. I don't have to tell myself that like George Washington loved black people because he didn't love black people. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to tell myself that
Germans.
He liked Germans. He loved the Bosch. He loved the Bosch.
When he died, he was in the middle of trading his Negroes in for Germans.
Germans, yeah, right.
Because you didn't have to house the Germans after they got too old to work. You just kept them on.
Just to turn them out.
Sure.
Right? So you know, I don't have to pretend that this guy was some kind of saint. I don't have to pretend that he had my best interests at heart. I have to ask myself, what is the structure in which I find myself with my fellow citizens? And how can we keep the rain out and keep the goddamn thing from falling down on our heads, you know? And you know, so that we have something that's maybe as good or a little bit better to pass on to our children. That's it. You know what I'm saying? So and my problem with the SJWs and with like the Elizabeth Warrens of the world and with the Pete Buttsex, whatever his name is that they're in this mode of permanent revolution and permanent like you know, it's like a permanent criticism. And it's like criticism is fine, but again, going back to Chesterton, who was a racist himself, but he was still brilliant, you know. You know, he said you have to decide between ending and mending. That's what you have to decide between, you know. And it's like if there's something good in something, do you want to end it or do you want to mend it? And depending on which one you choose, that's going to determine your whole moral posture toward that thing. So anyway, I hear what you're saying. I agree with you, Lynn. But it's just like you know, a lot of that goes away if you just start from gratitude. Oof, thank goodness this thing kind of works. Now, what's not working so well? Okay, how do we fix that? And that's all. And I just refuse to give up the ground to a bunch of people who don't know how to do any real work, never swung a tool in all their lives, right? And who think that the answer to making things better is to start swinging a hammer randomly. You know, it's like you'd never let a plumber in your house who didn't, you know, who thought that like the answer to your toilet not flushing was smashing all the pipes. You'd never go to an auto garage where the person said, well, you know, yeah, the spark plug's not doing whatever. Well, yeah, we're gonna have to break the whole engine down. You'd never do that. So why are we trusting these so-called revolutionaries who just want to smash everything? We can do better than that.
I agree with that. I don't wish for civil war. I don't wish for collapse. I feel strongly that it is inevitable, but it might not come for many decades, you know. I don't know. And I do not wish for it. I have small children. You know, I'm sitting here waiting for a power outage. I'm not wishing for a power outage. I want to be prepared and I want to understand the reality.
Yeah. And that's a good thing. Yeah. But I mean, look, you know, I mean, death is inevitable, but understanding that death is inevitable is a very different moral posture from being suicidal, you know, right? Or even being just apathetic or nihilistic. You can know that death is inevitable and love life, right? You can know that because all systems collapse. We're not going to get outside of that, man. We're mortal creatures. We live in time. Everything fades. Everything decays. Everything goes away. That's not the point, you know. So the point is, you know, does it matter? And this is something I was going to get to is that really the hollowing out of the spiritual life or the religious life in the West, if you will. I think that's one of the big problems. It's like the death of God was a huge problem because if you couldn't decide that there was an apex, there's an aim point, there's something to orient yourself towards, going back to like Jordan Peterson language. If you can't decide that, then you orient yourself according to any goddamn thing. And going back to Jimmy's point, I mean, that's one of the reasons why it's not just these tech executives that are kind of deifying themselves. It's ordinary people who should know better that are deifying them. You know, and people are telling us, yeah, Elon Musk is going to save the world. What? You know, with a stupid idea for a train inside a vacuum tunnel? Really? You know, like we're appointing these like saints and these like figures that haven't put in the work to be saints. It's like now we got Saint Greta, lecturing us at the UN, and people are looking at it like, yeah, this person is beyond. This is what happens when you fail when you don't have an aim point. And it doesn't matter what the aim point. I'm not advocating for the God of Abraham. I'm not advocating for any specific thing. I'm just saying it's like, if you don't have something to orient yourself towards that's outside the human sphere, then you get what you've got now, and you lose the idea that what you do now, acting virtuously matters because it matters.
Well, I think that goes to James too. I want to hear from you, because acting virtuously, because like this is what the existentialists try to pretend is true, that well, it doesn't matter, but you just pretend it does, and that works out. But when you have barbarism versus civilization, you have real consequences, right? I mean, personal, immediate, and violent consequences.
One thing, just to finish off my point on how we misunderstand our system, generally, on the conservative side in this country, people believe that this country was founded for the common good. On the liberal side, people tend to believe that this country was founded so that every white man could exploit every other type of person. But the fact is this country was founded and structured so that a tiny minority of elites of different races could exploit the mass of people below them. So while people on the left and the right, the people on the left want to throw it away and build something new because they think it was designed to help the people on the right exploit everybody else, and the people on the right want to repair it because they think it was designed for the common good, the people that are manipulating this struggle between the American, different wings of the American population, they know, at least instinctively, that the purpose of this structure is for the elite to exploit the mass of the people. And they use it in that way, and they use the different political sides against each other. So I think, for instance, the Democratic-Republican thing, I think is just a good cop, bad cop routine. I don't think it's in any way an authentic power structure between the groups. Now, one thing that I think that we're engaged in with what we're doing online, and the other people we talk to, like the guys from the myth of the 20th century, to get to the point about the spirituality, is to a certain extent, I've listened to most of your interviews, particularly with the Catholic scholar, the lady I think from Chicago. I think what we're doing with this tiny bit of the bandwidth online, we're trying to preserve older ideas and trying to get at the truth, is similar to what monks and monasteries were doing in the Middle Ages, where they're actually trying to salvage things from the previous civilization, and not to a large extent, not even things that they advocated. You had these were Christians that are salvaging the works of Aristotle, who's an ancient pagan, and so we've at least got a starting point or an aiming point there, and maybe it's both, where we're actually trying to preserve cultural ideas and basic things like ideas of honor and truth that are really seem to be casualties in the current social structure.
No, that's it exactly. I mean, exactly. You raise a very good point about these the monks and the monasteries. And again, I was conscious of this when I was thinking about the Foundationist Society, right? Like the idea that it's someone's got to keep the lights on, there's a guy named Rod Dreher, Dreher, who writes for the American Conservative magazine, and he wrote a book called The Benedict Option, referring to I guess Saint Benedict of Nursia, who and the idea behind the Benedict Option is, according to him, is that America and to a large extent the West is a post-Christian civilization, and that Christians need to prepare themselves and to build structures that can ride out the storm. You know what I'm saying? So I'm very much. I think you're right on target for that. I would say that going back to what you said, so right on. Like the liberals want to do one thing because of the myth that they're functioning under, right? And then the Democrats and the Republicans want to do something because of the myth they're, because they think that the founding myth, they interpret the founding myth differently. And I think my stance, and I think even your stance too, Jimmy, is that, I want to preserve the thing because it's keeping the rain out. Right. It's like, again, I'm going back to being in that house, in that broken down house with my dad. It's like, I don't care why the house was built, and I don't care about the crimes that the previous inhabitants are guilty of. This is worth preserving because it's my home. And once again, back to Chesterton,
totally agree with that.
It's a practical masculine approach to the situation. The only reason to me why it's important, why it was founded, is to find out what its natural gravity is and to realize that if you're trying to do good for most people, that there's going to be friction involved.
I see what you mean. Yes, that's right. You have to understand the design. That's very interesting. As a software guy, that really resonates because if you want to go into a system and hope to make some changes, that's fine. But you have to understand the design intent of that system, right? And it's like you're not going to successfully debug a big complex piece of software unless you can get into the mindset of why was this system built and what was the design philosophy of the original designers. Once you can understand that, then you got a better chance of whatever changes you want to make. You got a better chance of making those changes without blowing the whole thing up. So I think that's right.
You don't want to be caught on this false polarity. I'll give you one example from American history. In 1676, there was something that came to be called Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia. Okay, there is every 20 years a book is written about this that flips the script and argues on one of the two sides of this false polarity, which are the 100 years too soon theory, which is this was an attempt at a glorious American Revolution that failed because it was attempted 100 years too soon. The flip side is the leftist side that said this was just an attempt to kill innocent Native Americans by dirty white trash. Okay. Against the wishes of the benign, colonial government. But it was neither one of those things. It was this this nasty gang fight between these different groups of people in a slave society where out of 46,000 people, there were only 2,000 free people. And you had multiple races of people involved on top of that. You had you had Indians of different races. It was crazy. And nobody ever looks at whatever really happened in Bacon's Rebellion because all the scholars argue back and forth according to this false polarity.
Yeah.
Which would have been thought ridiculous by the combatants at the time.
Themselves, right.
Clearly stated what was going on. So that's just one, and we don't have to get into that rebellion. But the point is a very complex situation was taken, as Ezra Pound said. The art of infamy is to offer two lies and to get people arguing about which one of them is the truth.
Yeah,
and that's all that is.
Yeah.
So that's why I've just tried to get it kind of what the basic functionality of this national system is and nations in general, so that people that care could actually try to tweak it so it could be used for good instead of bad, instead of a pillaging system, because all nations are just set up as pillaging systems. So the fact that anything good comes of it is kind of a miracle.
Right.
Which goes to the point that there's a lot of people like you and Lynn that care, that aren't just like cynical people that like writing about crazy stuff like me, but they actually care about trying to get things running so it hurts as few people as possible. So you could take a machine that was just designed to be used by one group of people to pillage everybody else, and you can make it pretty comfortable for maybe a couple generations for the majority of people. Even though you started out with something that was just an eating machine, you can use it to provide. So I'm just into trying to understand the mechanics of the machine better, so that people like you can figure out how to use it for a better purpose than what it was designed for.
That's right. And speaking of interesting, since you were talking about the internet earlier, you think about the fact that, okay, like one of the things I'm doing here at the ranch is I'm teaching myself how to weld by watching YouTube videos and practicing in my workshop. Now, so and a lot of people are using the internet to kind of like publish things. Well, of course we are, right? Now we're communicating using a network, okay, that was designed as a network, a command and control network that could survive a nuclear war. That's what the internet was originally designed to be. That was the original ARPA/DARPA project. It's like, can we design this thing where if 3 or 4 of our favorite cities have been taken out, we can still get messages around the network. And this many years later, we have basically a planet-spanning network that, yes, even though there's Twitter, which is a sewer, and there's Facebook, which is a sewer, all cities have sewers, but all cities have places where you can go and do worthwhile things. So yeah, I'm with you 100% as to that. But yeah, going back, you can't be under any illusions as to what the original intent was, because then you're going to end up deceiving yourself, and that's never a good look.
One thing that I'd like to bring up, because we kind of skipped over the God part, which is probably the biggest, it's definitely the biggest part of this whole thing, because we've got a society that largely doesn't have a soul. The monks that preserved the works of Aristotle and other pagan thinkers of an earlier era, they did so with the knowledge that he was looking for what they felt like they had found. They were just documenting an old person's search. His 2 terms that have been translated to God are the unmoved mover and the cause uncaused. Mm. And these monks were translating that. And a lot of his work was actually preserved by Byzantines and Catholics who later converted to Islam under military pressure. And so it wasn't just, these works were not just preserved in Christendom. They were actually preserved under the house of submission to God, or Islam too. So, and even with these competing belief systems, people that were stuck in this territory or that territory with these competing religions and these nascent states were still able to essentially work together in a remote way, preserving the same source material. So that's one reason why I really liked the interview you did with the Catholic lady. I believe she was remember her name?
Rachel Fulton Brown. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was
Chicago. Thank you. Yeah, she's amazing. In fact, I have another interview that I did with her, which is still in the can. I haven't yet edited that and put it up, but I'll get off my ass and do that as well. But yeah, thank you. It's interesting, right? Because lately I've been finding that there's a certain, almost the only people who make sense to me anymore are people like you, Jimmy, and like some of my religious friends. It's like, and kind of like just ordinary, what we'd call conservative, working people or what have you. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, I'm a heathen that finds myself closely aligned with some Christians.
Mm-hmm.
So, so we have so much more in common than either one of us have in common with these atheistic, secular humanist people that seem to be trying to control opinion in this day and age. So that's fascinating when you think about all the liberal sensibilities that these atheists purport to uphold are really distillations of Christianity. And the Christians have nothing in common with these people. And they claim to be anti-Christian, and I'm a heathen. I mean, I wish Thor were one.
Right.
Still, I have more in common with the Christians, and the Christians have more in common with me, because we believe in something that's greater than ourselves.
Right.
So ultimately, these people, this whole celebrity culture is engaged in this type of crazed crowd self-worship. That's why it's such an effective mob.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny. I've been saying to people that, when they kind of get all up on their hind legs, that, it would be better and more dignified if you would just be called to Christ already. Like it would at least, you'd at least have some historical weight to the shit that you're spouting. If you would just go ahead and testify for the risen God. But I think I don't know if it was the interview that's on my site or this other one. But when I was talking to to Professor Brown, one of the things we were talking about was that, religion is what you get in any case, right? And it's just like markets, markets, property and markets are what you get in any case.
Just like Greta preaching apocalypse. It's
exactly like, and at least in a sane society.
And divine judgment.
Right, exactly. In a sane society, she would have been in a convent somewhere, and we would have had some kind of historical weight to the thing, and maybe she would have been caring for the poor or something like that, as opposed to just having some washed up showbiz mom that's pushing her in front of the cameras, and I mean, it's disgusting. But yeah, religion is what you get in any case, and the question is like how to the extent that you understand that you have a religion, then you got something to work with, because then you can question it. You can say, this is my doctrine. What's your doctrine? I think God is 1 and 3. You think God is just one. You think God is an energy field. I think so and so. Whatever. Like, you can have a conversation about it. But when people have a religion that they don't recognize as a religion, those are the most dangerous people around, because they can't even make the case in terms of trying to convince or trying to put forth a doctrine. It's just like, whatever I think right now is the right thing, and that's it. And that's what we're seeing with these SJW types, is that, it's a mob that's not even doesn't even have the distinction of being a religious mob.
Yeah, well, they're living the lie.
Yeah,
and they believe it, and they don't realize that they're part of the most rabid theocracy that I've ever studied.
Right.
It's really crazy. There weren't a whole lot. There were some of them. There weren't a whole lot of Christian aesthetics that were willing to go out there and just cut their junk off.
No.
They might put themselves in a closet or something, or maybe even go out to the cathedral once a year and march around it and flagellate themselves. But, they weren't cutting their junk off and bragging about it.
No. That's,
We got ourselves a basket of crazies now.
Yeah, well, I mean, people will quick to talk about the Catholic Church and child abuse, but it's like, I don't know what you call it when it's like when you're deciding to mutilate children and chemically castrate them. I mean, at least when the church did it, it was like, okay, well, you're going to come up here and sing.
That was on the agenda last night, was how to reduce the cost of puberty-blocking medications for children.
You're shitting me. I'm sorry. Excuse my language. I see your daughter.
They can't hear you. But yeah, it was. I have a screenshot. This is. I mean, it's very shocking to think that this is our mainstream politics right now, but it is.
Yeah.
Child sacrifice. That's what
it's child sacrifice, right? Yeah. And again, it doesn't even have the distinction of being child sacrifice for a god. It's like we need this because
it's for the the elevation of humanity into God, to try to pretend that we could transcend our humanity into some nebulous creature with no gender and no identity and no race and nothing.
Well, this is I'm thinking back to C.S. Lewis talking about the abolition of man.
That was a great book.
If you're not Catholic, you're going to be Catholic soon, my friend.
The Abolition of Man was a great book.
Awesome. Yeah, just amazing, right? And I mean, so prescient, right? I mean, this guy had these people in his sights, like. Dead to rights.
In the 1930s.
Exactly, right. That's what I'm saying. It's amazing. Like, what? How did you get? I'm reading this guy, and like every time I open the book to a page, he is firing, and he's hitting all his targets. Yeah.
I can tell you from I mostly just read primary sources now, and to the extent that I read secondary sources, I only read them prior to the mid 60s. and I prefer them from the 19th century.
Yes.
1930s is really the clutch time for when the narrative shifted. We think of it as happening in the 60s, I guess because of our recent history. But when the narrative really shifts, there were ongoing debates between people that believed in elitism and the general good, going back to the late 1500s, all the way up to about 1860. After 1865, you start to see a consolidation of academic opinion in America and Great Britain that becomes gradually mythologized and monolithic until you finally have dissent is pretty much eradicated in the mid-1930s. And then after that, you basically have one party line that from there on out just gets whittled down and watered down, but doesn't manifestly change a lot. Because what I did is I tracked for the primary sources that Lynn sends me, that she gets from schmoozing people at libraries. I'll read the forewords that are written by, let's say, the academic in 1861, then the one in 1901, and then the reboot in 1935 to see how the academic lens has shifted on the same document. Okay, and in the document itself, there will be points of debate in the document itself that are actually authentic. So C.S. Lewis, along with other authors in his period, Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft were two of them. And J.R.R. Tolkien was another one. Edison, who wrote a book that a lot of people think Tolkien took as a model for The Lord of the Rings, called The Wormwood Boards, which was written was written in the 1920s. These guys that had gone through World War I, or had at least been spectators, and who had not gone through World War II yet, they really had a much more enlightened view of things than we do. And so anything you can read from the 1930s, written by a guy that was educated before the 1930s, is a find. Even textbooks. I've found elementary school textbooks that are better than current university level textbooks.
100%. Yeah.
I've been 1920s and 30s that give you a very different narrative than anything you'd find 20 years later.
Yes, I can recommend to you. I don't know if you've taken a look at this one, but there's one called The History of the City of London by Walter Besant. And that was written, it was written for schoolboys. It wasn't written for adults. It was a school textbook. But I mean, like the level of, just the depth that it goes into and, the rigor of the thing, when you read that and then you read a modern textbook, like you see right away how far the rot, has spread.
Yeah. So, C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man, if people haven't read anything from this period, I'm glad you brought that up. That's probably the ideal book to start with. It's a small book. I read it like on 2 lunch breaks in a 2-day period, I think. It was a pretty small book, and his premise is he's actually writing against what he calls the Green Book. That some banal teacher in a school somewhere is trying to foist on the student body as the truth.
Yeah, it was a pair of progressive educators, actually. I forget what their real names were, but yeah, it was this duo that were pushing this thing. It was a real book. That's right.
My review of it I titled "Against the Green Book," which is a quote from C.S. Lewis from The Abolition of Man. But yeah, that's an excellent place to start. And indeed, the idea of cyclic history, of history being cyclic, was just standard until then.
Yes.
You don't see history as generally taught as a lineal progression.
The introduction of Whig history, where we're all proceeding toward the arc of the universe, the moral arc of the universe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't come into vogue until after World War II.
Well, it's I've heard people say, and I'm inclined to believe it, that even though it didn't come into vogue after World War II, that it really World War I was the real defining event.
Oh, yeah.
Because then you got You got people who you got the quote unquote optimistic view of history where, okay, we need to perfect human nature so this thing doesn't happen again. And then you have the tragic view, which is like this kind of thing always happens, you know.
If you look at what the literature that came out of World War I that's most significant, it's the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Okay? So this is another British vet of World War I, Mervyn Peake.
He wrote Gormenghast.
Gormenghast, Titus Groan, and Titus Alone. Edison wrote the Worm Ouroboros again. And then you have on the German side, what Ernst Jünger, also a science fiction author, wrote Storm of Steel, which is the best war memoir that I've read. And he wrote some very predictive science fiction. So you got an awakening of literary-minded people who survived that Holocaust. And it's a book that a writer and podcaster from Portland, Oregon, Dennis Dale, interviewed me for lunch 3 times when I was in Portland. He bought me a book by Hemingway called The Torrents of Spring, in which he really talks about the betrayal of the honorable man and the warfighter by Western civilization in this book. And Hemingway was also a World War I veteran. He despised people like Scott Fitzgerald, who were part of his literary circle, because they hadn't been through a war. And he was an ambulance driver in World War I, which is, my father-in-law was an ambulance driver, and it's one of the worst jobs you can have in modern war. Yeah. And that's another major literary figure from the period that was strongly influenced by World War I. And he basically wrote counterculture fiction because of this. You know, so it took a generation of mature literary figures for that to kind of get out of the literary system in the West. But if you look at, that chord that the Lord of the Rings, which is probably the best distillation of this whole thing, that chord that strikes in people, the Lord of the Rings, the Dark Lord and all that, that's Western Civ gone wrong.
Yeah.
You know, that was kind of what was going on there. And of course, C.S. Lewis was part of that too. And he was a close correspondent with Tolkien.
Yeah. They had a group. There was a literary group called, I guess that was Oxford, called the Inklings. And it was like Lewis and Tolkien, a handful of other guys. I think they were all Christians, or most of them were Christians. What do you think, Jimmy, about the the way in which like the rise of the managerial class after World War I, the rise of like the desire for central planning and things like that maybe more after World War II.
It's reflected directly in the military history at the end of World War II with the murder of George S. Patton.
Okay.
This is, and on the losing side with the murder of Erwin Rommel, by his people. And these are war-fighting generals that led from the front, men of the old kind. They're the last of their kind that were permitted to exist. And in terms of military conduct, the war leader was taken out of the equation, with both of those characters being murdered by their own high command at the end of that war. And things were already well in swing. Hemingway writes about this in The Torrents of Spring, which was written, I think, in 1926. It's a short story satire, and it's one of the things it's satirizing is the managerial class. And it's about 2 guys that are managers in this factory in the Great Lakes region, and you find out towards the end of it that one of these guys, he's a climber scumbag who's marrying this older woman for security, and then dumping her for a more attractive woman right in front of her in the same diner, at the same time that his buddy, the other manager, is secretly a World War I veteran, combat veteran. He doesn't advertise it because they aren't respected. They weren't respected in Britain after World War I. The English soldiers were not respected.
Yes,
in Britain.
That's right.
They weren't given jobs. They weren't respected in this country. Now, what Hemingway writes about is this man, this Anglo-American, looking for a speakeasy to go drink at. He finds the speakeasy with the help of two Native American veterans of World War I, one of whom lost both of his hands. And all he could do was play pool. They go to the speakeasy that's run by an Indian and his negro bartender, who's also the bouncer. And the Indian bar owner and his African-American,
Afro-British
bouncer, they beat up and rob these three war veterans who are patrons of the bar. Because they've broken a rule. The Indians have brought a white man to the speakeasy, and it's a Native American speakeasy. So the black dude beats them all up and throws them down the trap door of the barn where this thing is, and the Indian even loses his artificial hands. Okay, and then the novelette ends with these three men lost and alone, but with each other, walking down this wintry street with the one guy with no hands. They're all war veterans. They're men of two different races, and they've been shit on by a multiracial group of people who represent the exploitative managerial system, which is also in this novelette represented by the police, who are their enemy, and the guys that run the company, and are basically not even interested in building good stuff. They were just interested in making the best profit they could. And
now, wait a minute. This novel was set.
This is written in 26. It's called The Torrents of Spring.
Say it again.
The Torrents of Spring. I reviewed it at some point on my site in like the last 2 months. Okay.
And it's set in the U.S. or in Europe?
It's set in the U.S.
Okay.
And it's set in the Great Lakes region. And it's really about this betrayal of the warrior by the managerial class. Post-war, the same thing happened at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. 80% of the sailors, of the British sailors that won that war, won the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. In 1816, after Waterloo, they're released without pay to starve and freeze to death in the year without a summer. The coldest year in recorded history was 1816. These men were kicked out of the Navy without pay, and they died homeless on the streets of the country they saved from the enemy. And who did they die at the behest of? The managerial class. So this was the whole goal. The whole goal of the British Empire was this designed obsolescence as part of the economic engine that would be fueled by this cultivated mediocrity, which is the job of the managerial class, which is to ensure mediocrity. And this eventually becomes the poison in the nationalistic veins that even kills the warrior class. So you even have the German and American war machines at the end of World War II assassinating their two best generals because they're actual hero generals that will go out there and potentially take a bullet for their cause.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I remember when I started really reading about World War I was kind of shocked that that in a so-called modern war, right, you had generals that were actually going over the tops of officers who were going over the tops of these trenches with their men. It wasn't just.
It's never been truer that a war killed the best men that fought in it than with World War I. In fact, the combat sport of savate died.
The French, yeah.
That sport died because of World War I. Every champion except for Georges Carpentier, I think, died in that war. Almost every professional fighter in France died in that war. Okay, and yeah, it was just insane. So it was a cleansing of the old Aryan warrior class by the managerial class, okay, that actually ran this war and just murdered them. The whole idea about the Indo-European social structure was that we might fight each other as nations, but we're part of the same warrior ethos. That's basically what it's about. And, that goes from like northern India all the way to Ireland for 4,000 years of human history. That's basically what was targeted in World War I by the managerial class. The guy that writes about it most profoundly is Julius Evola, and I've summarized his work in a book I'm going to send to Lynn next month called The Sons of Arius.
Okay.
Which is basically about, kind of the life and death of the Aryan warrior tradition, which is really just the idea of the war band. That, what defines us is that we can either uphold the system if it's good, or we could topple it if it's bad, and that when we do fight wars, we don't exterminate each other in the end.
Right.
We come to an honorable agreement. That's basically that whole ethos. Which is the object of managerial warfare is to kill that.
Fascinating. Yeah, that seems right to me. Yeah.
And the object of the managerial economy is to put the managerial class in charge of the war machine, so it can become a managerial tool.
Well, this is one of the reasons I think why the whole Brexit, Britain versus the EU thing is so interesting. But before I jump on that, wasn't there, speaking of warriors versus the fighters versus the managerial class, wasn't there, even before that coldest winter, I remember reading about these two pretty famous mutinies in the British Navy at one of the biggest kind of harborages in the south.
I'm familiar with one.
The Spithead. There was one called the Mutiny of the Nore, which was one of the anchorages. And basically all these British sailors were like, okay, enough of this. If we see enemy sails, we'll drop the strike and stand to. But otherwise, you have to pay us better, feed us better, what have you. So that's been that kind of thing has been a dynamic again and again in these kind of imperial fighting forces. It seems like
that drove what you're describing there. That type of thing drove the press gangs to work harder, get slave sailors. For the British Navy to function the way it did, at least 60% of the men had to be slaves.
Yeah, right.
Okay, right. They had to have been beat the shit out of by the other men, dragged on board ship, and they put to work. One of the mutinies that happened during the period of the American Revolution, slightly after, involved American sailors who had been kidnapped, abducted, forced to serve on a British man of war, and a British captain was killed in the Bahamas. George Washington signed the extradition order for an American that was part of that mutiny to be extradited to Britain and hanged.
Holy smoke.
Right. And they had recently finished their war of independence with the mother country, but the class solidarity in that age was thus. It was so strong. And it was so important. An excellent example of how the warrior has to be demonized in American history is the managerial class, the managerial war machine of the Union against really the old style hero general armies of the South. Okay. So the most vilified figure in the American Civil War is Nathan Bedford Forrest. Okay. Who is basically, this guy liked his Negro folks so much, he wanted to free slaves in Africa and bring them to America as free men and pay them wages. Okay.
Wow.
But we're taught all this bullshit about what a racist he was. And the first thing he did was free all his slaves when the war started. He's like, I didn't want this war. He said, I need your help. He said, so I'm freeing you. You can stay with me and I'll pay you wages, or you could go your own way. And out of 51 of them, 49 of them stayed with him. His bodyguard was made up of African-American Confederate cavalrymen. All right. And most everything you hear about him in history is a lie, because he was hated by the Union for being a man of honor. I mean, he would write letters to Union generals saying, your boys are raping our Negro women. Okay. That has to stop. Okay?
Yeah.
This kind of thing. It's like, we don't do this here. So you see a figure like that who's an actual hero that fights in hand-to-hand combat, kills 35 men with his own hands, and he's got to be evil. Okay? And you got to make up stuff about it.
There was one thing, James, that we had talked about and wanting to talk about, so I think this is a good spot to tell you, to remind you that the idea is that one of these ideas that gets thrown around is like that society should be organized according to race, or it is organized according to race, and there's some kind of attempt to upend this organization. But what you have experienced and what I know Mr. Mike is interested in too is that masculinity is a more sound foundation, for how to organize people. So Nathan Bedford Forrest is like obviously the prototype there, because he was living under the norms of his time, but he made his own system. He was a slave owner, but he had different ways of more honorable ways of managing his household versus any other, or the bad examples that are out there as well. So go for it.
Well, he's a man that totally believed in crossing racial lines, that was a man's job, and that's what you did. After the Civil War, during Reconstruction, he would have regular barbecues with all the leading African American men in his region, and he would check with them, what are your concerns about your people? What are your concerns about my people? Let's figure out how we're going to work this out. That was the way he went about things. He's considered a racist because he killed a black man after the Civil War. That man was beating his wife, and he was half Nathan's age, and the wife came to him and said, my husband is trying to kill me. And Nathan went to him and said, you are not to beat your wife anymore. This is unacceptable. And the man said, I'll beat my wife when I want to. You can't make me do otherwise. And they had a fight, and old Nathan beat his ass and killed him. Okay? And we're taught that this is evil, that this meant he hated people. No, he respected African American women and thought they had the right not to be beat up. Okay? And he did this with the support of the local African American community. He was actually acting as their advocate in this situation. This man was terrorizing his coworkers and his neighbors, being an outrageous bully. And what I found in the workplace, as the lowest level grocery clerk and the top guy, I ended up being a general manager at a supermarket, and I found out that the men who wanted to undermine me were, when I was the manager, they were men that looked like me. They just wanted to cut my throat at every opportunity. And most of the African American fellows at work, they couldn't believe that I would have their best interest at heart, because I'm an evil white guy. I'm the white devil. So I went to the guy that hated white people the most. He's a black Muslim. I went to Tyrone and I talked to him. He looked like former heavyweight contender Michael Grant. I walked up to Tyrone and I explained to him the situation, how I wanted to make it a better place for everybody to work. And I was leaving. As soon as I got this store set up and running properly, I was leaving, and everybody under me was getting a promotion. I didn't want to do this for the rest of my life. I was doing this maximum of 4 years. And he said, you know what I am, right, Jimmy? I said, yeah, you're a black Muslim. He said, and you know what you are? I said, yeah, I'm the white devil. I'm not a white devil. I'm not the small t white devil. I'm the white devil, okay? I'm evil, okay? I said, but what can I do for you? You know what I need you to do for me. He said, I don't care about these poke eaters, which he meant the guys.
Yeah, guys eat pork.
Muslim. I said, you bring me a black Muslim man, I will hire him. I said, if you find a pork eater here that you want to convert to Islam, you have my blessing. You can proselytize because you guys work. And I've never had any problem with black Muslim men. Okay? The guys I have problem with in this industry are these city hick white boys, okay, that just hate black guys for no reason. And these black guys that think I hate them for no reason. I said, those are the people I have problems with. I got no problem with you. I even told him for his daughter's birthday, I'd do a white devil cameo. and we got along great. Okay. Now on the other hand, when I was a grunt on a night crew, I had a a black supermarket manager was very rare in the Baltimore area because that was the business that the sons of white union steel workers and auto workers got into when those businesses died. All their kids, like mainly East Baltimore County Caucasian people, we all went into the supermarket business because it was unionized in the Baltimore area. So there just wasn't much of an African-American tradition. So we had two black guys as supermarket managers. One of them was named John Garrett, not the brightest guy in the world, smart enough to get the job done, tall, good-looking guy, great customer service. So he's the front man for the store, and he's being told to hate me, that I'm his enemy. I'm the biggest producer on the night crew, but the redneck night captain and the redneck grocery manager who hate me, they hate my hippie ass because I'm better at their jobs than they are, and they think I want their job and I don't. And they can't stand taking orders from a black man. I'm sitting on the toilet in the men's room, and Kenny and Ralph, the rednecks, come in there and start talking about they cannot tolerate having this black man telling them what to do, and they got to get rid of him. And their strategy for doing this is to get his dumb ass to fire me. Okay, so what Kenny tells Ralph to do, I picked my feet up because I had distinctive work boots that I wore, and I didn't want them to know that I was there. So I sat on the commode with my feet up so they wouldn't see I was in there listening to them. And their plan was to have the night captain not do any work, have me do all of his work, and then have him make me do my work. So I'll have to stay and work unauthorized overtime and then have John fire me, okay, for working unauthorized overtime. So what I did is I knew John was coming to me with my write-ups. So I had already gotten, anytime the night captain was breaking any rules as far as cash handling and stuff like that and playing Nerf football in the front of the store, I would go up front and buy something so there would be a photo and receipt record that were synchronized, okay, that I have in my wallet of him on film doing something against company policy. So I was waiting for John to come up and give me my suspension forms and everything. I said, John, I know what that pink slip is. Before you give it to me, look at these times on the security camera for register 15. All right?
Wow.
I said, I'm not the enemy you think I am. I said, I don't want your job. I don't want Ralph's job. I don't want Ken's job. I want you guys to leave me alone so I can be your best clerk. All right? You got that? So the next day, the grocery manager is humping dairy freight in Anne Arundel County, and the night crew captain is working frozen food in Towson. Okay? So I made an alliance as a white trash dude at the bottom of the hierarchy with the black dude at the top of the hierarchy, you know, because you had these two pirates trying to screw the organization over just so that they could screw him over on a racial basis. And it shows you how weak the race card is. Okay? This was like around 2002. So this was during that period of time when in the workplace, white guys and black guys were generally regarded as equal by most companies. You know, 20 years before that, the black guy was an asshole.
Right.
15 years after that, now the white guy's an asshole. Okay. But this was during that period of time in that work market where basically we had even treatment by management. Neither one of us were considered villains or martyrs at that time. You know,
that's very interesting. You talk about that kind of historical shift, right? Because I remember that there was this like kind of brief, there was this brief period where, because I came up
in 95 to 2005 was basically racial equality in the grocery business. Before that, if you were a black dude, you were going to get thrown under the bus. After that, if you're a white guy, you're going to get thrown under the bus.
And I think that's fascinating because in the industry I came up in, it was like I remember when I came back to New York, it was in the mid 90s. It was very hard back then. The only companies paying people to write software were banks and insurance companies. And good luck being a black guy trying to get a job in that environment. And then there was this kind of shift where it's like, okay, whoever can do the job, what have you. Now we're in a situation where, like you said, like now it's standard practice to hate on the white guy. And, I'm suspicious of all this shit because at the end of the day, once I grew up out of being like a young, angry black progressive, I began to see that, man, this race thing is a distraction. It's a planned distraction, and someone is doing something slick. You know what I'm saying? And
so you're a black guy, you're conservative. You know, you could go get a job over at Fox and make $1 million. What are you doing?
That's a very good question. Well, I mean, one is that I don't think I could get a job.
Better looking than Larry Elder.
Oh, well, see, Larry Elder, so I got a problem with Larry. So you see, so this is the thing, right? It's like one of the reasons I'm doing this kind of on my own and just, you know, as the forlorn hope is because like these. It's not to say that Larry Elder is evil or that like that kind of stable of black conservatives, so-called conservatives, is evil. It's just like they've lost the plot as well, right? Because at the end of the day, like what it is okay, we got on the left, we got all these white folks and some black folks to kind of like parroting the company line and not thinking too deeply about shit, and right. And then we have people just flipping around that narrative and spewing that and saying like that and like no, like Larry. It's not that Larry Elder's wrong about everything, but Larry Elder isn't. I don't see that he's necessarily trying all that hard to get to the bottom of what's actually happening to us. And that's the same. I think that the same goes for most of the people over Fox News, with the possible exception of Tucker Carlson, who I think
Agreed.
He must have had a road to Damascus moment or something, but he's really, I mean, like he's just firing. I mean, that guy's he's on to something. But
that seems to give a shit about working.
Exactly. Now I'll give you a brief example, Lynn. So, okay, when social justice warriors want to. One of the lines of bullshit that social justice warriors typically trot out is the notion of systemic racism is what they say, right? Now, I think that most of the times they say it, they're using it as an excuse for something. I find it insulting to me as a black person, you know, the idea that that you shouldn't expect black kids to hit the books as hard because of quote unquote structural racism. And the reason I think that that's bullshit is because but the reason I think it's bullshit is not because I don't think structural racism exists. I think structural racism does exist, mostly as expressed in things like housing law, like that you can go back and look at the books and look at laws that were placed on the books having to do with housing. And you can see right away that, well, this was racism being baked into the legal code. Jimmy could tell you about like things like rogue and vagabond laws and stuff, which are basically runaway slave laws. But I'm just talking about, you know, in the modern era. Now, Larry Elder never wants to come to terms with the structural racism that really does exist, again, as expressed by housing law. And because housing is a long-lived asset, any racial discrimination that's baked into housing is going to stick around for a long time. Now, someone with imagination, someone who was really trying to get to the heart of things, could make a case that appeals to black folks with self-respect and white folks with self-respect. You know, white folks who don't want to have their skin color used as an epithet, right? There's something to say to people like that. There's some, you know, some white kid in Allegheny County whose dad was a steam fitter or welder or what have you. Like I have something to say to that kid and he has something to say to me. But the problem with the Fox News black conservatives or the Fox News conservatives more generally is that all they want to do is flip the script around and hurl insults back at me. And they're not trying to get to the bottom of things. What they're trying to do is make ratings, which God bless them. But I want to get to something more like that's deeper and more interesting. I was reading about, what's his name? Andrew Carnegie, you know, and you know, his whole relationship with labor and a lot of that, and that was a white on white conflict mostly, right? You know, the word honky used to be a term of a derogatory term for white people. Where does it come from? There's an argument that it comes from the term hunky, which was like these Hungarian Americans or Hungarian immigrants who lived down the hill at Homestead, right? Where what's his name, Frick's coking plant. Okay, and these are people who fell out against Pinkertons and kind of private thugs in labor disputes. All these things are so much more interesting than just you're deplorable. You white guy in flyover country, you're deplorable. You black guy who lives in the city, you're gullible. And you get off the plantation and you do this and do that. Like I'm just so that strikes me as a lot of the Fox News narrative from Larry Elder to what's his name, Hannity. It's like these guys, they've lost the plot.
Booking agent, if I'm basically your agent and I'm talking to Fox News, I'm supposed to say, well, Carbon Mike is interested in the search for the truth, not cashing your check. Is that the answer?
Oh, I'm interested in cashing checks, all right. Don't get it twisted. I am a capitalist, but I don't think they want. Put it this way. I don't think they want to hear what I have to say, because the first thing I'd say is all you Republicans, it's like you don't deserve to be in the politics business, because if you can't get the black vote, if you can't get the, and I'm not mean the vote of like spoiled black college students who want to throw a hissy fit because it's a statue of General Lee. I'm talking like real black folks who swing tools for a living, black folks who, when I go out of my house, I see them, repairing the street or driving the bus or driving the subway or what have you, the tellers at my bank, Democrats have nothing to say to these people.
Well, let's pretend let's pretend I'm Moneybags GOP over here, and I say, I want some black votes. We need to peel off, like, it's 95% Democrat, right? Let's peel off 5%.
Yeah.
Can we do this? What would you sell them? Sell me. Give me your elevator speech.
That is a great. Oh man, thank you. That's such a great question. The first thing I do is I'd say, okay, start with local elections, and what you can do in a city like New York, for example. What you do is you go somewhere, anywhere, right? And you have a press conference, a meeting, whatever. And you say, look, I know, like, for example, you could go to Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, and you could say, I know, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm running for such and such, I'm in the Republican Party. I know that Republicans haven't always spoken to you all respectfully, but that stops with me now. And here's my case for smaller government to you. Like, what do I believe in? I'm a conservative. What does that mean? These are my principles. I believe in smaller government. Why? Because I believe that many of the decisions that you have to make in your communities are best made by you and the people close to you. I know a lot of you own property. I know there's a great tradition in Bed-Stuy of black property owners going back generations. What happens when you want to build an addition onto your brownstone? What happens when you want to replace the boiler in your basement? What happens when you decide that you want to rent your house out on an Airbnb basis? This happened, by the way, to a friend of mine, a black woman, a business owner who also owns the house she lives in. Her family's owned property in Bed-Stuy for at least 40 years, and she was fined $10,000 by the city under progressive mayor Sissy Bill de Blasio, okay, because she was doing Airbnb. Okay, so if this Republican running for some office, you go into that community and say, listen, I think that there are things we can do to cut the size of government that are going to make it easier for you to either preserve your property and pass it down to your children, or to turn your business idea into a success, or to do whatever you're trying to do to make ends meet, or to enhance your prosperity without government crawling all over you. And that's part of my case for a smaller government. I would then say, I know some of you guys have to get up in the morning and go, those of you, how many in the room work for transit? Again, you're in a room full of black people. You go to, you go to some church, wherever you go, right? It's like, how many of y'all work for transit? How many of you all have to walk past the welfare office in the morning and see people gaming you see people whose clothes are nicer than yours. See people whose sneakers are newer than what you have on your feet in line to get a check. How many of you seen people gaming the system for EBT cards? And you say, listen, I'm not mad at the welfare system per se, but this is a system that it's not sustainable, that we keep taxing you black folks who get up every day and work for a living, and we pay people who were pay young women to have children out of wedlock. I think that's wrong, and I think that's wrong no matter who's getting the check. That's a very different thing from saying black people equals welfare and black people want free stuff, because I remember my parents being livid, and other working people who were my dad's friends and my mom's friends being livid at the idea that the government was paying women to have kids out of wedlock and not to have a man around. And you can close your eyes and throw a rock in the black community and you can hit someone who is incensed about that. And the reason they vote Democratic is not because they want that to continue. It's because the people who could propose something different don't come to them and ask for their vote respectfully, and don't treat them as if they also go to work for a living and also have businesses and own houses and what have you. So that's part of what
Honestly, I'm going to be really honest here. What you're arguing for is like close to almost, not really maybe exactly, but pretty close to something like segregation, right? Because
no, not at all.
Because you have to bring it local, right?
Well, that's not. But wait. I don't want to interrupt your train of thought. But I just want to say segregation is you have to live here because you're this color. I'm not saying that.
And I never would have advocate like a legal structure for it. But when you're talking about the black community having these people who are working hard and so angry at the single moms, I mean, that's like pretty much either a universal trait that we know that the single moms are like ruining everything, or
I don't think the single moms are ruining everything. Well, I don't think that. And I'm mad at them.
It's not a personal thing, right? But a household that is led by a single mother, dependent on the government, is a household that is usually a source of problems, whatever color it might be.
Yes,
I mean, the point is that it's not segregation by color or by law. It's localism means that you need to figure it out. Like, we need to figure out what's going on in this house, in this neighborhood, in this town, and go out from there. And I completely agree with that, but that doesn't work like when you're GOP. Like, if I'm GOPE Moneybags, I'll say, no, yeah, I don't want to do that. I just want you to come on TV, and talk about how much you love being a small government Republican.
Okay. So I'd say yes. That's one reason why why Fox News has nothing for me, and I have no time for them. But I don't think that's segregation. I think listen. That is, even if you go back to Reagan, who I got my problems with Reagan, but that's another story. I think Milton Friedman, who was kind of the brains behind a lot of the Reagan era policies, was much more interesting. And his mentor, right, the guy he was channeling, Friedrich Hayek, the Austrian economist, very interesting, because what these guys were saying was that the problem with government is not that it is necessarily evil. The problem with government is that it is distant, and no central authority can know enough about the particular conditions in a place to be able to have a coherent policy in that place. And as a computer guy, as a systems guy, the one of the kind of the tenets of cybernetics control systems is that intelligent behavior is impossible without feedback. So yes, I don't think it's necessarily anything to do with segregation. Doesn't have to do with being mad at single moms or mad at anyone who is even on welfare. But the point is that these are the point about single moms is that they're like everyone else, and therefore they follow the incentives like everyone else.
Yeah.
And so if you, and again, I don't know why more so-called Republicans, so-called conservatives are not saying this. Anywhere you go in the world, you go, okay? If you get women to form stable pair bonds, to plan their. I used to work for a company that did this. I used to work for a company in Baltimore that used to send people. It was an NGO type thing. They were affiliated with a local university. They'd send people to different countries, rural Bangladesh, whatever, the Philippines, and they would say, listen, young ladies, young men, how about you get together, plan your families, don't have a bunch of kids at once, space them out, wait till you have a little bit of, some assets before you have your next kid, what have you. Maybe give them a little bit of money, a little bit of something to get them going. Anywhere in the world you do that, the standards of living begin to rise within a generation. So we have to be insane to think that we can have a welfare system that says go out and have kids and we'll pay for it, and that's going to be good. So localism, yes, federalism, as classically defined, right? The idea that, or even talking about Catholics, right? The Catholics have this thing they call subsidiarity. Same thing. The decisions being made should be made as close to the problem as they can be made, because Washington doesn't know what's happening on my street. Albany does not know what's happening in my kids' school. It's not because Albany's evil. It's because they're far away. And there are so many, again, the Republican Party just are guilty of the worst political malpractice, because they're looking squarely at a deeply conservative voting bloc, and they can't make any traction. Well, yeah, because you're insulting people. Go on, I'm sorry.
I'll tell you one factor that I think. Well, first I'll say really quickly one of the first things that James came up with that really impressed me that I read was that he said that welfare, at least part of welfare, should go to the father of it. If the welfare is associated with a child, at least part of it needs to go to dad as well as mom. And that was also an idea proposed by an anthropologist who's dead now, but he lived and studied in Africa a whole lot. Because that will at least direct the incentive towards a family unit and not towards mom, like, here's your incentive to kick dad out and keep having babies with different dads. But what I see is, like, using this silly GOP example of where, like, I might say, okay, you're energetic, intelligent, and talented. You could really get something done in your neighborhood, but here I come with my, like, corporate managerial mindset. I say, no, I want you to come work for me in the capital, Albany or DC or wherever it might be, and I want you to be on TV and talk about how great it is to be a Republican. And so that sucks out, that's the brain drain, right?
Right.
It sucks out somebody who could be working and making a big difference to 5 families or 10 families or 20 families, and now they're just gone.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I see what you mean, and there is that. But listen, we got a lot of. We do have a city council. I mean, Baltimore has a city. I mean, how long has Baltimore been a deeply dysfunctional city? Baltimore has a city council, and some of the people sitting in those seats, right? Some of those local politicians have been there for you. They're dug in like ticks. So, it's not even so much that you're sucking, because listen, most of the people in any community are not going to go into politics. And the brains that you need to solve problems, the brains are not coming from politicians, because that's not who's actually solving problems. Innovation and ideas don't come from politicians. And this goes to something I'm so glad you asked this question, because it's something I definitely wanted to touch on tonight, it's almost like it's almost like if you wanted to have a kind of a political formula, right? Going to your question of, what would you say? Or if you had a new party that was coming on the scene, and what would you say? It would be like, instead of make America great again, it's like, let's make politics boring again, right? Ideas don't come from politicians, okay? Business doesn't happen because of government. Ideas come from people who are solving problems. And commerce happens almost in spite of government. And so the question is, what can government do to get out of the way of people's desire to turn their know-how into wealth, to turn their assets into prosperity? And there's a case to be made for this in every state of the union. I was just reading about how in Tennessee, if you want to do someone's hair, if a young woman finds that she's good at doing hair, she wants to do her friend's hair in the living room, she has to pay the state of Tennessee. She has to pay for certification. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
It's against the law in many rural municipalities in America to own chickens.
Right. Right.
I mean, to grow your own eggs. It's
correct.
Against the law.
Correct. Right. So what I'm saying is, the reason I'm so impatient with this stuff is because this is something, it's like, I can make this case. I mean, Jesus, I'm not in politics professionally. I'm a nobody with a day job. Okay. And it's like, I can make this case. I could make that case to a bunch of white people sitting next to a bunch of black people. And you know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm making the same case to all of them. It's like so this notion that that you have to just shrug your shoulders and give up and say, well, either we're going to get the white vote or we're going to get the black vote. It's nonsense. It's like, no, it's a lack of political imagination. It's from a managerial class that is morally bankrupt, just about, and intellectually exhausted. And it's like there's all these ideas out here, but the ideas come from us. And what government should be doing is getting out of our way, and also trying to. This is important too. Setting the ground rules, trying to make. Well, let me back up a second. I forget who it was who said that that you could make the case for liberty and private property, and this kind of small capitalism, provided the people in the electorate weren't being asked to shoulder too great a risk. So there is a sense in which any kind of quote unquote conservatism that says, hey, you are just, take your risks and you're on your own. Any kind of conservatism that does that is going to have much less traction with, for example, black folks. Why? Not because black folks are stupid, but because based on some complex historical factors, including the structural racism in the housing arena, means that we're much less risk tolerant because we have much less of a cushion to fall back on depending on the neighborhoods we live in. Speaking of Fox News, what's his name? Not Hannity, but the other guy, O'Reilly. He grew up in, I believe, Levittown. Levittown was one of these post-World War II communities that was set up more or less by the government, kind of subsidized by the government. If you were a veteran or what have you, you could come, you could get a low interest or zero interest loan. You could get a house, whatever. It was not a problem. But it was only open to people of a certain color. These were land grants. And what it meant was that that at a certain point in American history, if you had not very many assets, you could be in a situation where you got some land, you got a house. Before too many years, you had some equity. You could borrow against it. You could start a business. Okay. People who didn't have that, okay, didn't have a chance to build a generational cushion that would make it so that your grandson could decide to start a company, what have you. Now, I don't have to be mad at people of a certain color because of that. I don't have to use your skin color as an epithet. This is simply something that has happened to us. Okay, so here we all are. So how can we fix it? Can we fix it?
There have been measures since then to try to fix it. There's no laws on the books nowadays that says you can't sell your house, or you could, no restrictive covenants or anything like that, or redlining. And there have been big moves in banking and lending, huge, and that was, a factor in what we saw in 2008, where people just went wild lending. I'm kind of anti-usury and anti-bank, and I would rather see more restrictive lending than less across the board, because it's risky, and so there have been measures since then.
Yes, and I don't want to necessarily. So I'm with you mostly. I would say that I'm not even arguing right now that we should have more measures to remedy that thing that happened in the past. I'm not even prescribing anything like that. All I'm saying is that if you are trying to come up with a conservative formula, right, that's going to appeal to a certain demographic, you just have to understand that some demographics are less risk tolerant than others, and for perfectly good reason. That has nothing to do with, and remember, I'm not even talking about welfare. I think Bill Clinton's welfare cuts did not cut deep enough. I want to be clear on that, okay? And I think the welfare system is still way too bloated, okay? And yes, does that mean that if we cut welfare, we'd add to the total sum of suffering? Maybe, but it's like these policies are so bad for the black community, we have to do something. Okay, but separate from that, you mentioned the housing crisis. This is another good example of why Republicans can't get traction, and why I have no time for Fox News. Because while it's true that the government engaging this kind of lending, like I think Fannie Mae, Sallie Mae, whatever, you could argue that was bad economics, and I wouldn't argue against you. But I want to be very clear. It is simply not true that the housing crisis was caused by people issuing low subprime mortgages to black folks. That's not true. Now, should they have issued those loans? No, they should not.
I wouldn't characterize it racially, but I do think it has to do with the subprime, though.
It has,
and
it
the
has
securitization. I mean, it was magnified.
But that's the thing, because and this is very important, right? Because the fact is that it's not the fact that there were these subprime loans. It's the fact that Wall Street was allowed to take these subprime loans and chop them up and sprinkle them over everyone's portfolio using financial instruments they did not fully understand. And this is a known problem with financial derivatives. And again, we're talking about scale, and we're talking about using things without their intended purpose.
Yeah.
I know I'm going
that's
to
why, I know. And we're running out of time, but that's why I really got mad when I was like, those people should be in prison because they should be. Yeah, James.
I got one thing to say. The type of neighborhood you're talking about, that one jerk or Riley, basically, the payoff for your Caucasian American soldiers and servicemen at the end of World War II for wiping out the rest of European civilization.
Yep.
Payoff was to get houses in places like Oakley, places like Martin's Air Force Base in Baltimore County. Right near there, there's all the aeronautically named streets. There's several neighborhoods that I know of, that I've been in, that I know people that used to live there in Baltimore County, that were areas that were built for people who either served or worked in industry during World War II. And these people were essentially gifted homes. Okay?
Right.
And these were all Caucasian people. None of their grandchildren can live there because the welfare system has been used to engineer invasions of every one of these neighborhoods by inner city Baltimore welfare families who are essentially criminal families. The top 5, Baltimore County, lost a $320-some million lawsuit against the federal government, which has demanded that Baltimore County spend over these 5 years, and we're 2 years in, $320 million to resettle Section 8 families from the 5 worst zip codes in Baltimore City to the 5 best zip codes in Baltimore County. There is nowhere in Baltimore County, if you live in a house that's smaller than a mansion, that you can own a home for more than 5 years right now. I know people. There's a lady that I used to work with who lives in an area that was built for employees of Bendix Corporation, which built things for
Bendix. Yep.
Okay. She can't afford to move. She can't afford to buy any more security doors. I chicken wired her back porch in so that people couldn't climb up on her back porch and kick in the back door, because there's no traditional white working class neighborhood in Baltimore City or Baltimore County where a child or a grandchild of one of these white people who were given preferential real estate treatment 50 years ago can now live in safety because they've been ousted. Now, at the same time, business practices were changed in Baltimore City to prevent black men from running businesses in Baltimore.
There you go.
And the only people that could run businesses were people from out of the state or out of the country. Local people just couldn't do it.
So this is like the perfect scam on the part of the managerial classes. I think when you and I sat down with Dominic, I said this looks like a clearing operation to me. Right.
So this is like this is a classic. Really, it's a shell game of almost in the subtext playing off groups of people against each other, because you're actually employing them as villains for each other.
That's correct.
For one group of people, you're not allowing a black guy to run a business in Baltimore City because you won't give him the credit. In the meantime, guys his age are getting low interest loans out in the county in these places that were set up for people like him. Right. So
and that black guy in the city, like if he, the young black man who maybe he shacks up with a girl and gets her pregnant, whether it's planned or unplanned. Now he has to move out. Like, in other words, like, so he has no place right. He has no place in the merchant class. He has no place in terms of the pride of place in a family as the head of a family, you know. And it's like this is populations being weaponized against each other. And none of these okie doke conservatives who are in the spotlight. Listen, most of them are not really. They're not even no one has to solve the whole thing, but no one's even touching a piece of it. You know, it's like they're just going blithely along as if
you can't. It's taboo. Yeah. You know, because like you even have Joe Biden, who's making one generation ago progressive ideas like you have to go in, and he said he got in trouble for this. Like, you have to go and do extra preschool, reach out to the families, and like, oh no, that's not the right thing now. Nowadays, you have to say that. Essentially, you have to tear down the white families because your progressive policies to uplift the black families hasn't really worked. So so Joe Biden's like on this 20-year-old script, and he got in big trouble for it. But supposedly he still polls better with blacks than any of the other groups.
Well, again, I would say that he probably polls better with blacks than you're saying he polls better with blacks than his counterparts in
Bernie, GOP. No, than Bernie or Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, or I don't know, Hillary's in there, but like on the Democrat primary.
I mean, I would imagine so, because I think, look, black folks, again, working black folks, forget about the college students and the SJWs. Working black folks don't really trust a socialist, and they shouldn't, right? So Bernie's out. And they also know he's old, and really he shouldn't even be in the race, right? Yeah. And then Elizabeth Warren just seems kind of fake, and so does Hillary Clinton, obviously, right? So I think that's why it's almost like it's not like he's doing better. He's the least bad. And this is the other thing.
And he still has the warm glow from the Obama years, probably too.
The Obama years. Yeah. Well, see, here's another thing, right? It's like. You get this all the time if you listen to the kind of the mainstream conservative commentators, which is that black folks. It's like black folks are just voting on the basis of race, and everyone else is being rational. And the fact is, black folks have been voting for the white guy in this country for years, and have had no problem with it. It's like, in other words, like.
That's a funny way to put it. Yeah, it's true.
In other words, black folks are perfectly capable of saying, okay, who can look when black people have run for president before, and they didn't get any of the black vote. Why? Because black voters, working class black voters, said, yeah, but you can't win, or yeah, but your ideas are stupid. But if you listen, it's like, but how, like, did Jesse Jackson sweep the black vote? No. Did Al? No, wait a minute. Did Al Sharpton sweep the black vote? No. But every time you turn on any kind, even if I go online and hear any kind of a conservative people talking, white or black, there's one phrase which they're guaranteed to say. It's Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton. Like, that's like, as soon as they open their mouth, they're either saying the word plantation or they're saying Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton. Now, the moment someone says that, I know that they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't want to know what they're, because I've never met. Listen, before I lived in this house, I lived in Bed-Stuy. I had a landlord. My landlord was black. His brother, he and his brother were both Army veterans. They owned a home construction company. While I was there, they had a Section 8 tenant they were desperately trying to get rid of. These guys are small government conservatives, okay? And I've never heard any working class black person quote anything from Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton.
Okay.
Ever.
The only thing I can say is that the numbers don't lie. It's there's no other demographic, whether it's men or women, racial or any other, or like even college educated. Like, what's probably close is college professors. Like,
no other demographic is what?
That votes so monolithically by party. Right. So,
by party, but by party, not by race. That's my point. Yeah, in other words, look, man, when Al Sharpton ran for president, Wesley Clark. I think Wesley Clark came in almost dead last in the primaries, and Wesley Clark did way better than Al Sharpton, even with the black Democrats. I liked Wesley Clark.
Remember, I'm Moneybags GOP. So I want to know how I get. So actually, I think I'm kind of made a clever connection here that probably university professors and the African American vote are the only, like, the two best aligned demographics for voting. They're both like 95% Democrat no matter what.
Well, right, and what I'm saying is the reason I'm coming back to Moneybags GOP. You want to peel off votes, great, because I don't think the Democratic Party doesn't deserve anyone. No party deserves anyone's vote. First of all, if politicians got what they deserved, hell would be gentrified right out of existence. Okay, so that's out. But what I'm saying is, yes, and the reason that I keep coming back to this, the reason why black people seem to vote so monolithically Democratic is that the GOP seems to in lockstep insult black voters every chance they get, and all they have to do is stop. They don't have to come up with a solution to all our problems. They don't have to split the atom. They don't have to fix the economy. All they have to do is come and ask me for my vote respectfully.
I want to
say it.
So you're completely ignoring the black vote would probably be a step up then.
When you say ignoring the black vote,
like
they are ignoring the black vote.
But they're insulting. But if they're actively insulting, then
I see what you mean.
Well,
yes, yeah. Now I see what you mean. Well, yes, because if you just ignored us,
that would be a step up.
For most improvement. You'd be doing almost the same thing the Democrats are doing. You'd be just right, because that's really, because the Democrats ignore me and take me for granted. I'd rather go with them.
I need to call the Trump people and get some money, because I feel like we're making some progress here.
Listen. Here's the thing. I'm starting from this revolutionary, way out, oddball philosophy, which is that black folks are kind of like non-black folks. I know it's crazy. I know it's nuts. I know it's crazy, but I just have this weird feeling that, like, my dad's union brothers, who were like Italian American immigrants for the most part.
No, don't say Italian. I have this thing where because on the radical right, Italians are considered black, so then I get
whatever.
Triggered
but it wasn't just Italians. It doesn't matter, right? It's like I have this weird idea, right?
Yeah.
That maybe if you're white and you've swung tools for a living for 10 years,
yeah,
that maybe some of the things you're interested in, right, are like the same things that a black guy who swung tools for a living for 10 years, exactly.
Right.
And maybe if you just talk to them as if they're people, who knows?
All right, we're making breakthroughs here. All right, you guys can keep chatting, but I need to do some mom stuff. So this is the end of the Crackpot Podcast episode. I don't know what number episode it is, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks so much, Lynn.
Outer space, mothers can wait. We will take the ones worth saving. Pack your bags, we are vacating now. Forever, forever. There's a cosmic radio in my head. correspondent sadly said the universe is flat. He also mentioned that gravity is caused by our cavities and our reflection of time's not a receding hairline, it's all mass produced in the back of our mind. Let's face it, there's some things that we will never know, and I don't ever want to know. And so it goes. Let's fuck it up, let us run amok, let's do the things that we want to do. We're animals after all. Out yonder through the traffic and the